Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Crystal Rogers. Crystal Rogers, a 35-year-old mother of 4 from Bardstown, Kentucky, was known for her strong devotion to her children. She and her ex-husband Keith shared custody of their children. Despite the divorce, she maintained a friendly relationship with him for the sake of the children. At the time, her 2-year-old youngest son was with her current boyfriend, Houck. On July 5, 2015, Crystal's mother, Sherry Ballard, became worried when Crystal didn't respond to her phone calls. Crystal was a reliable and responsible who always responded to her calls, but this time Crystal was unresponsive. As the hours passed, Sherry's worry intensified, and after 24 hours without hearing from her daughter, she realized something was amiss. Sherry's instincts as a mother told her that Crystal's absence was unusual. She tried contacting Crystal multiple times, but her efforts were in vain. Sherry then reached out to Crystal's friends and family, hoping someone might know where she was, but no one had seen or spoken with her recently. Around the same time, Crystal's younger sister Brooke contacted Sherry, informing her mother that she too had been unable to reach Crystal. This makes Sherry even more worried and insecure. Crystal's boyfriend, Brooks, told her family that he had not seen her since Friday. He last saw her playing games on her phone before he went to bed. When he woke up the next morning, Crystal was gone. Brooks suspected she might have visited her cousin's house for the 4th of July celebrations. However, Crystal's mother, Sherry, became increasingly worried as she couldn't reach her daughter. She reported Crystal missing to the police department. While she was there, her son Casey received a call from a friend saying Crystal's car had been seen on the side of the road. This news alarmed Casey and his father, Tommy Ballard. They knew Crystal wouldn't voluntarily leave her car. When they arrived at the location, they found her car with a flat tire. This only deepened their concern, as they knew Crystal would have asked for help if she had car trouble. Casey and Tommy were puzzled as to why Crystal would stop the car to fix it herself. When they looked into the car, they noticed that Crystal's keys, phone, and wallet were still on the passenger seat. This discovery made them even more worried, as Crystal was not someone who would leave her belongings behind. The fact that her personal belongings were still in the car made her disappearance seem even more suspicious and unusual. After discovering Crystal's car on the Bluegrass Parkway, her father and brother immediately contacted the Nelson County Sheriff's Department. When investigators arrived at the scene, they found no signs of struggle, but one thing caught their attention: the driver's seat was positioned in a way that would have been uncomfortable for someone of Crystal's height, suggesting that someone else may have driven her car. The authorities continued to investigate and asked for help from potential witnesses. However, no one came forward with any useful information. The police then decided to use the media to appeal for public assistance in finding Crystal. They released her photo and asked for the public's help, but unfortunately, no one provided any significant leads. Tommy, Crystal's father, arranged search parties to find Crystal. The hot and humid weather made the searches challenging. Despite a large turnout, Crystal's boyfriend, Brooks, was absent. This made the police suspicious of his attitude. He seemed unconcerned about her disappearance. When questioned by detectives, Brooks provided an alibi, stating that Crystal and their young son had visited his family's farm the previous evening. They supposedly returned home around midnight, after which Brooks went to bed. He claimed Crystal stayed awake, engaged with her phone, playing games, as was her habit. In the morning, at 7 a.m., Brooks said their son was in bed with him, but Crystal was gone. Crystal's family initially suspected she might have gone out with her cousin. But those close to her dismissed this idea since she would never leave her 2-year-old son behind. Crystal's younger sister, Brooke, believed Crystal was planning to leave her partner, Brooks. According to Brooke, This was because Brooks had been dishonest with Crystal and lack of emotional attachment. Crystal told her mother, Sherry, that she wanted to leave Brooks. She said one of the main reasons was his controlling behavior towards her. Casey, Crystal's brother, had recently witnessed tension between Brooks and Crystal, including several heated arguments. The police asked Brooks to come in for questioning and take a polygraph test, but the results are not clear. Afterward, Brooks participated in a formal interview with the police. Detectives obtained video footage confirming details of Brooks' story. A video showed his truck entering the family farm, and later footage showed the vehicle leaving the property around midnight. However, because the windows of Brooks' truck were dark, police were unable to identify the occupants at the time. Brooks spent time at his parents' farm doing chores and setting a fire to burn some building materials. After for the fire to die down, he drove home. During a police interview, Brooks was questioned about a brief 13-second phone call he made to Steve Lawson, a business associate, while driving home. Brooks offered to have Steve explain the call to the police and asked him to call them during the interview. Steve claimed he called Brooks to get some phone numbers for a rental property, but Brooks said he needed to get home first and ask Crystal, who handled such matters. However, the police found Lawson's explanation suspicious, as it seemed rehearsed. The police were puzzled by this response, considering Brooks was with Crystal at the time of the call. They questioned why Brooks couldn't simply hand Crystal the phone, allowing her to discuss the issue immediately, rather than waiting to talk to her in person later. During Brooks's interview, his brother Nick, a Bardstown Police Department officer, called him with urgent advice to leave the interrogation room immediately. The police had doubts about their initial theory that Crystal had abandoned her car on the side of the Bluegrass Parkway and ran away. Instead, they suspected that something had happened to Crystal while she was at the Brooks family farm. As the investigation into Crystal's disappearance progressed, several people reported seeing Brooks's truck and Nick's police car at his family farm to the police. This led detectives to believe that the brothers might have been at the farm to dispose of evidence related to Crystal's disappearance. To learn more, the police brought in Brooks's brother, Nick, for questioning. They confronted him with eyewitness accounts placing that him at the farm on July 8 and asked him to explain his emergence there. Nick initially claimed he had no knowledge of the incident surrounding Crystal's disappearance and denied being present that night. The police continued questioning him, directly asking if he and Brooks had tampered with or hidden evidence related to Crystal's disappearance. Nick strongly denied any involvement and assured them that, as a police officer, he would never aid in covering up a crime. The police then asked Nick to submit to a polygraph test, which he agreed to. However, he failed to answer truthfully to two key questions: whether he knew Crystal's current location and if he was withholding information about her disappearance. Despite failing the polygraph test, Nick insisted that he was telling the truth. On October 15, investigators identified Brooks as the primary suspect in Crystal's disappearance. The same day, Brooks's brother, Nick, was terminated from the Bardstown Police Department for interfering with the investigation. Although the police were pretty sure they knew who the culprit was, they didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest. The police were concerned that if they took their suspect to court without sufficient evidence, the suspect might be acquitted. If that happened, they couldn't charge the suspect with Crystal's murder again. Due to the double jeopardy law. To help find more evidence, the FBI, Kentucky law enforcement agencies, Crystal's friends and family, volunteers, and missing people organizations conducted thorough searches at the Brooks family farm. The lengthy search left her loved ones terrified and desperate for news. As the search continued, her family remained hopeful that she would be found alive and well. At the Brooks family farm, investigators searched the ashes of a fire and, although they did not find any human remains, they did find pieces of clothing. Unfortunately, they were unable to link these clues to Crystal's case. The police executed multiple search warrants at the Brooks family farm, focusing on their cars and residences. However, these searches failed to yield significant leads or evidence related to Crystal's disappearance. A $100,000 reward was offered for any information that could help find Crystal, but unfortunately, no one stepped forward with any tips despite this large incentive. Tommy, Crystal's father, took it upon himself to investigate his daughter's disappearance, following every lead he received, no matter how small or insignificant it may have seemed. His determination was unwavering, driven by his love for Crystal. Unfortunately, Tommy had already faced a devastating loss in his family. In January 1979, his pregnant sister was brutally murdered by her husband and his accomplice. The perpetrators shot and beat her, set her remains on fire, and scattered them on a farm. Although it took years, the suspects were eventually arrested, found guilty, and sentenced to life in prison. Tommy remained committed to finding out what happened to his daughter Crystal, despite the many challenges he faced. He conducted his own investigation, canvassing the neighborhood, conducting interviews, and reaching out to anyone who might have information about his daughter's disappearance. To aid in his search, Tommy also utilized his own savings to hire private investigators and cadaver dogs. To keep track of the investigation, Tommy carefully documented every tip every clue he found. He worked with the police, sharing his discoveries and asking for their advice. November 2016, Tommy took his 11-year-old grandson, Crystal's son, on a hunting trip on their property early in the morning. As they left, Tommy's wife Sherry watched them go, feeling uneasy. She couldn't help but pray for their safety in the woods. Sherry tried to calm down after they left, but her peace was short-lived. Just minutes later, she received a frantic phone call from her grandson, Crystal's son. His voice shook with fear. He then exclaimed, "Mimo, Papa has been shot." Sherry's world came crashing down. Her nephew's panicked voice on the phone told her something terrible had happened. She quickly threw on some clothes and rushed to call 911, and she reassured her distressed grandson that help was on the way. Her mind was flooded with fears of what might have happened to her husband, Tommy. When Sherry arrived at the scene, she witnessed a horrifying sight: her husband lying on the ground, unresponsive. Distraught, she rushed to his side and tried to wake him up, hoping he would respond. But her efforts only revealed a grim truth: blood was pouring out of his nose. The officers and bystanders at the scene quickly pulled her away so that the medical team could try to save him, but it was too late. Tommy was pronounced dead. The initial police reports suggested that Tommy's death was the result of a hunting accident. However, Sherry knew this could not be true. She was adamant that her husband had been murdered, and she made her feelings clear to the authorities. "This is no accident," she insisted. "This is she husband, and it's a murder, and you know it." During the investigation, the investigators was found that Tommy's own gun had not been used, making it unlikely that he had committed suicide. The investigators then determined that Tommy's 11-year-old grandson was not involved in the shooting. As the investigation progressed and more facts came to light, Sherry's suspicion that her husband's death was indeed a murder gained credibility. The Kentucky State Police have informed the public that they are treating Tommy Ballard's death as a murder. The Tommy family believes that he was killed because he was getting close to discovering what happened to his missing daughter, Crystal. They think the people responsible for Crystal's disappearance felt threatened by Tommy's investigation and had him murdered to prevent the truth from coming out. In 2022, the FBI conducted a 5-day investigation into Crystal's disappearance. Investigators returned to the Brooks family farm to search for more evidence, with the goal of gathering enough information to hold suspects for Crystal's disappearance accountable. In October 2022, the FBI confirmed that it would analyze all evidence collected at its lab in Quantico. As the investigation into Crystal's disappearance continued, the Kentucky Attorney General appointed a special prosecutor to help prosecute criminal charges related to the deaths of Crystal Rogers and her father, Tommy. Crystal's mother, Sherry, was aware of and fully supported the decision to appoint a special prosecutor. She believed the move was necessary to ensure justice for her husband and daughter, and she viewed the appointment as a positive development that brought new perspective and expertise to the case. The decision to appoint a special prosecutor also showed that the case was being taken seriously and that those responsible would be held accountable. On September 2023, authorities arrested Crystal's boyfriend, Brooks Houck, and charged him with murder and tampering with physical evidence. The court set Brooks bail at $10 million and prohibited him from contacting Crystal's family members. Notably, Brooks was previously arrested in 2022 for multiple traffic offenses and was released after paying a series of fines. When Brooks was arrested for Crystal's murder, many in Bardstown brought a sense of relief. While the confirmation of Crystal's death was devastating, the community was relieved to know that justice was being pursued, bringing some sense of closure to the case. 1 month after his arrest, in October 2023, Brooks appeared in court for the first time, though virtually rather than in person. The judge inquired if the special prosecutor, Shane Young, was investigating other cases related to Crystal's case. The prosecutor confirmed that they were looking into the death of Tommy, Crystal's father, and suspected a connection between the two murders. Notably, Shane Young believed they had obtained the gun used to kill Tommy. The firearm was reportedly purchased from Nick, who allegedly used an alias during the transaction. Preliminary investigations revealed that the caliber of the rifle matched the one used in Tommy's shooting. Shane Young stated that they were examining the gun based on 5 key criteria. So far, the results have matched 4 of these criteria, suggesting a possible link between the firearm and Tommy's murder. Crystal's grandfather felt relief when the special prosecutors, Shane Young, connected the 2 murders in court. They hoped for a swift and fair outcome in both cases. However, when questioned about the allegations by Shane Young, Brooks and Brooks' mother refused to answer any questions. During the court hearing, the prosecutor alleged that the Brooks family had secretly recorded the grand jury proceedings. The prosecutor claimed that several family members Brooks were involved in this activity. Brooks' attorneys requested that the Nelson County judge be removed from the case, citing bias. They claim that the judge has had a hostile view of Brooks since 2017. The attorneys also argued that the $10 million bail is excessive and should be reconsidered. Attorneys representing Brooks argued that having a biased judge hear the case would be unfair to him. The lawyers argued that the judge's previous statements and actions showed that he was unfair. They asked the court to remove the judge and quickly appoint a new judge to ensure a fair trial. The Kentucky Appeals Court has recently made 2 key decisions. Firstly, Brooks will remain in jail with a $10 million bond. Secondly, the court has denied a request to remove the judge presiding over Brooks's trial. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Corey Richins. Eric Richins was born on May 13, 1982, and had a profound impact on the lives of those around him. Throughout his childhood and teenage years, Eric was fiercely passionate about sports, excelling in basketball, baseball, and soccer, which reflected his dedication to staying active. His true love, however, was anything that took him outdoors, particularly hunting, where his exceptional marksmanship and keen eye earned him numerous trophies from around the world. Eric was renowned for his dynamic personality, which radiated joy and laughter wherever he went. He possessed a natural talent for telling stories, playing harmless pranks on friends, and contagious laughter that would light up the room. Eric was undoubtedly the life of every party, leaving a lasting impression on everyone he met. Eric, a Utah resident, possessed an extensive collection of motorized vehicles, including trucks, four-wheelers, and snowmobiles, which he used to explore the outdoors and satisfy his thirst for adventure. Although he loved having fun, Eric was deeply committed to his faith and was an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. With the encouragement of his family, he volunteered for a 2-year mission trip to Mexico City, where he honed his Spanish language skills. Upon completing high school, Eric pursued higher education at the University of Utah, graduating in 2009 with a bachelor's degree in international studies and a minor in Spanish. Eric met Corey Darden at Home Depot, where she was an employee. As a regular customer due to his construction work, Eric developed a friendly connection with Corey over time. He was attracted to her charm and beauty, but was too shy to approach her directly. So Eric asked a friend to help him get her contact information. One day, while Eric's friend was shopping at Home Depot, he casually asked Corey for her phone number, mentioning Eric's interest in getting to know her better. Appreciative of his friend's help, Eric anxiously waited to hear back. It was now up to Eric to make the next move, and he finally summoned the courage to call Corey, arranging their first in-person meeting. Unbeknownst to him, this meeting would alter his life forever. From the moment Eric and Corey met, they clicked. Their connection was undeniable, and their first date marked the start of a romantic journey. As they introduced each other to their families, their bond grew stronger. Corey's mother and brothers instantly took to Eric, while Eric's family was equally impressed by Corey's kind nature and how well she fitted in with him. Although Eric's sisters, Katie and Amy, were initially cautious, they soon warmed up to Corey and made her feel part of their family. Eric and Corey tied the knot in 2013 with a private wedding ceremony. 2 years later, Corey gave birth to their first child, Carter, and later Ashton, and finally Weston, completing their family of 5. Eric proved to be a natural at fatherhood, and his sons looked up to him with admiration. He was exceedingly proud of his boys, celebrating their every achievement, whether it was academic, in sports, or in the arts, and was always present to cheer them on and congratulate them on their accomplishments. Eric eventually launched a stonemasonry business which proved extremely successful. His exceptional craftsmanship and meticulous attention to detail set him apart, attracting clients seeking his expertise in crafting stunning stonework. The thriving business brought financial security to Eric and his family. Meanwhile, Corey's real estate ventures also generated a significant income. Her entrepreneurial drive and in-depth knowledge of the local market made her a vital contributor to their family's growing prosperity. She would buy homes, renovate them, and sell them at a profit. As a result, the Richens family built considerable wealth, and their lifestyle embodied the pinnacle of success. On the surface, the Richens family seemed to have a perfect life. However, this illusion of perfection shattered on March 4, 2022, when Corey made a frantic emergency call to report that her husband Eric was not responding. When paramedics arrived, they discovered that Eric had sadly died. Corey was devastated by the news and called her mom, Lisa, who rushed over. Her brothers DJ and Ronnie joined them, struggling to process Eric's sudden death. They'd celebrated Corey's business success at their new mansion earlier, with Corey making Eric a Moscow Mule before bed. She'd slept with her son due to his nightmares, and when she returned to their room at 3 a.m., found Eric cold and unresponsive. As Corey waited for the paramedics to arrive, she remembered the dispatcher's instructions to perform CPR on Eric, which she claimed to have followed. While the paramedics were unable to determine the exact cause of Eric's death, they suspected it might have been an aneurysm, given that Eric was a healthy 39-year-old with no known medical conditions. However, it emerged later that Eric had confided in Corey about chest pains the night before his death, which lent further support to the aneurysm theory. But the autopsy results were to reveal a shocking truth. Eric's death was caused by a lethal dose of fentanyl, a powerful and dangerous pain medication that can be fatal in excessive amounts. This discovery raised a critical question for the investigators. How did Eric ingest this substance? Eric's family blamed his recreational drug use for the fentanyl in his system after he died. Corey said Eric took THC gummies nightly to relax, but they worried about their source, suspecting he bought them illegally. Despite this, Eric's family firmly rejected the allegations, convinced that there was more to the story, and urged investigators to explore alternative explanations. Meanwhile, Corey attempted to move forward with her life, but her brother Ronnie disclosed that she was facing immense challenges. The loss of her husband and their father had created a void in their lives, and their 3 sons were acting out in response to the uncertainty surrounding his death. Detectives suspected foul play in Eric's death. After Corey appeared on Utah News to promote her book on grief, she was arrested May 8, 2023, accused of murdering her husband. The community was stunned, trying to make sense of the sudden, tragic turn of events. Corey has been accused of homicide by poisoning. Eric's family claims that Corey deliberately added a lethal dose of fentanyl to the Moscow Mule she prepared for him on the night he died. However, Corey's lawyer argues that no fentanyl was found on the glassware at their home. Corey denies any involvement in Eric's death, stating that she had no motive to harm him. Corey's mother, Lisa, was shocked and disbelieving when she heard about her daughter's alleged role in Eric's death. She told investigators that the couple seemed happy and there was no reason for Corey to kill him. However, the investigation revealed that the relationship between Corey and Eric was not as perfect as it seemed. The couple had issues, and Corey, a stay-at-home mom for several years, longed for independence. Furthermore, Corey was growing increasingly frustrated with Eric's frequent hunting trips. Lisa revealed that Eric had been unfaithful in the marriage, and the couple had confided in her about the affair. Eric and Corey sought counseling to address their problems, but Eric's family denies that he ever cheated on Corey. According to them, the couple's decision to seek counseling was driven by Eric's love for his sons and his desire to save the marriage. Eric had started thinking about what would happen if he got a divorce, despite trying to save his marriage. To protect his assets, he took some precautions. Without telling anyone what he was doing, he set up a secret trust with his sister Katie. During the investigation, it was found that there were 6 life insurance policies on Eric, worth a total of $3 million. 2 months before Eric died, Corey had forged his signature on another policy worth $100,000. It was also discovered that Corey had allegedly taken money from Eric's personal accounts and misused funds from his business over several years. A spokesperson for Eric's family claimed that Corey's house-flipping business was in trouble, despite her claims that it was doing well. In fact, it was millions of dollars in debt. The spokesperson alleged that Corey urgently needed money, and that, according to a premarital agreement they had signed, she would only inherit Eric's business assets if he died before her, while they were still married. Corey's attorney rejected the allegations, clarifying that her business was not in debt. They pointed out that temporarily taking on debt through lines of credit was a standard practice in the house-flipping business, and that once the properties were sold, the debt would be settled. The attorney stressed that the large figure cited by the spokesperson simply represented the volume of business transactions involved. Lisa, Corey's mom, said Eric backed Corey's business ventures, including buying the Heber Valley mansion where they partied the night he died. Corey bought the 2017-built abandoned mansion with investor help, planning to develop it into a recreational spot and sell for a profit, potentially earning $12 million, a huge jump from the $3 million purchase price. Eric's family says he opposed buying a mansion, contradicting reports. They claim he argued with his wife about it, and that Corey gave him a fentanyl-laced drink on the night he died. They also accuse Corey of previously trying to harm Eric on a Greece trip. However, Corey's brother Ronnie denies these claims, saying Eric's illness was due to taking antibiotics and being mistakenly served liquor. Eric's family claims Corey tried to kill him twice, including on Valentine's Day 2022, when he had a severe allergic reaction after eating a sandwich she brought him. They also questioned her behavior after his death, including an incident where she punched his sister in the face and neck while trying to access a safe containing $125,000 to $165,000 in cash. Corey had a 4-hour bail hearing, handcuffed beside her attorney, trying to convince the judge to release her on bail. Prosecutors presented 3 witnesses and evidence, claiming she poisoned her husband. A cell phone expert testified about Corey's Google searches, including how to retrieve deleted iPhone texts and a lethal fentanyl dose. Her attorney countered that these searches happened after her husband's death, as Corey sought answers to her own accusations. Prosecutors questioned the lead detective about Corey's sources for the drugs used to kill Eric. A woman named Carmen Labber, who worked for Corey, told investigators about a meeting where Corey asked her to buy fentanyl for an investor with a back injury. Carmen, with a criminal history, agreed and bought 15 to 30 pills, exchanging them for cash on February 11, 2022, days before Eric's poisoning attempt. During the investigation, Carmen revealed that Corey got in touch with her again, saying he wanted stronger drugs. She said Corey paid for the pills with a check about a week after Eric died. However, Corey's lawyer disputed this, suggesting the check might have been payment for cleaning work instead. The lawyer also tried to raise doubts about Carmen's trustworthiness by pointing out that she was a convicted felon on probation. At the bail hearing, Eric's sister spoke to the judge about the family's intense emotional pain after Eric's death and their fear that if Corey were released on bail, they would suffer even more. The judge decided to keep Corey in custody. In 2023, Corey had a serious medical crisis in jail after taking prescribed medication, which caused her to have a seizure and required hospitalization. While searching her cell, jail officials found a handwritten letter that prosecutors claimed provided additional evidence of Corey's plans and motivations. Prosecutors requested a no-contact order, citing the letter as proof of Corey's attempt to intimidate witnesses. Prosecutors claim Corey wrote her mom, instructing her brother Ronnie on how to testify in court, saying Eric got drugs in Mexico. The letter stated Ronnie should say Eric admitted to buying pain pills in Tijuana and to obtain texts about Eric's drug use. Corey adamantly denied the letter was witness tampering, stating that the letter was nothing but a fictional creation she wrote as a fantasy story. The judge denied the motion for no contact, stating that the state failed to prove witness tampering. Corey's family seeks custody of their 3 sons, currently living with Eric's relative. The boys have regular video calls with Corey in jail, and her family attends their public sports events. Corey faces 25 years to life if convicted of murdering her husband Eric with fentanyl. His family has filed civil cases, believing she's after his money. The trial starts in 2025. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ryan Poston. Ryan Poston was born on December 30, 1982, in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, to Lisa and Jay Poston. He had a strong and loving bond with his 3 sisters, Allison, Catherine, and Elizabeth, throughout his life. Growing up, Ryan had the opportunity to travel extensively and attend schools in Switzerland and the Philippines. This exposure broadened his horizons and gave him an adventurous spirit. Ryan was also known for his striking good looks, which, coupled with his charismatic personality, made him stand out in a crowd. After graduating from high school, Ryan attended Indiana University, where he earned a degree in political science, history, and geography. He excelled academically and graduated with honors in 2005. Following in the footsteps of his family members, Ryan pursued a career in law. He enrolled in the Salmon P. Chase College of Law at Northern Kentucky University, driven by his admiration for the legal profession. His esteemed grandfather and uncle, both practicing attorneys, were his role models. Ryan's ultimate goal was to own a successful law firm. While in Cincinnati, Ohio, Ryan dedicated himself to helping people who couldn't afford expensive lawyers. Despite being young, he had already built a strong reputation, and many sought his advice. He worked hard to ensure everyone had access to fair and competent legal representation, regardless of their financial situation. After a painful breakup in 2011, Ryan turned to his cousin Carissa for comfort and support. During a visit to Lexington, Kentucky to spend time with her, he met Shayna Hubers, a Lexington native, and his life took an unexpected turn. Shayna Hubers embodied the quintessential Southern girl, renowned for her outgoing personality and effortless ability to form friendships. Her warm and charming demeanor naturally drew people to her. After graduating high school in 2009 with a full scholarship, she continued her education at the University of Kentucky, majoring in psychology, before pursuing her master's degree in psychology at Eastern Kentucky University. Despite their 8-year age gap, Ryan was 29, while Shayna was just 21. Their feelings for each other grew increasingly undeniable. With each visit Ryan made to see his cousin Carissa in Lexington, he found himself devoting more time to Shayna. As they spent more time together, their bond deepened. Shayna began spending more time in Highland Heights, the Kentucky suburb where Ryan lived. Every weekend, she would pack a bag and visit Ryan's home, dedicating herself to taking care of him, cooking his meals, and cleaning his living space. As time went on, Ryan and Shayna's relationship grew stronger, and he took her to meet his parents. She was over the moon with excitement, telling her friends all about Ryan and even saying she wanted to become Mrs. Ryan Poston. But their promising future came to a tragic end on October 12, 2012. In a panicked call to the police, Shayna admitted to fatally shooting her boyfriend, Ryan. The details she shared revealed a devastating scene of domestic violence that had spun out of control. According to Shayna, Ryan had tried to physically abuse her, dragging her out of the house when she attempted to gather her belongings. She told the 911 dispatcher that Ryan had confronted her with a gun, leading to a physical fight. In the heat of the moment, Shayna managed to grab the gun, but she was intimidated by Ryan's size. In a state of panic, she pulled the trigger, ultimately shooting Ryan. Shayna admitted that she believed Ryan's death was inevitable, so she claimed she wanted to end his suffering. She told the 911 dispatcher that Ryan was in distress, making unusual sounds, which motivated her to shoot him several more times. Afterwards, she revealed that she left the gun on a bookshelf. Minutes after Shayna called 911 to report that she had shot her boyfriend, officers were sent to the scene. When they arrived, they told Shayna to come out of the apartment with her hands up. At first, she was hesitant, but she eventually followed their orders. As she walked out, they told her to lie face down on the ground. It was clear that Shayna was very upset as she complied with their instructions. After the officers handcuffed Shayna and put her in the back of their patrol car, they entered the apartment and found Ryan Poston's body on the dining room floor, covered in blood. Crime scene investigators arrived and examined Ryan's condo, which looked a bit messy, but nothing out of the ordinary for a 29-year-old man. They found that Ryan had a concealed carry permit and owned weapons, including the Sig Sauer semi-automatic gun that Shayna used to shoot him. Based on the evidence they gathered, the investigators concluded that Ryan was sitting at the table when Shayna opened fire. They knew this because of the blood found on the table. However, the fact that several items on the dining room table were not disturbed raised doubts about Shayna's story. If there had been a fight, the items would have been disturbed. The crime scene investigators thoroughly searched Ryan's apartment, gathering every detail. At the same time, police officers questioned Ryan's neighbors to see if they had any information that could help the case. One of Ryan's neighbors, a woman named Nikki, spoke to the detective and provided some useful insights. Nikki knew Shayna well and thought that Shayna was more committed to Ryan than he was to her. According to Nikki, the couple often had loud, angry arguments that disturbed the neighborhood. Nikki remembered a specific incident several months ago when Shayna came to her door in tears, saying she was afraid of Ryan. Shayna had told Nikki that she and Ryan had a violent fight, during which he lifted her up and threw her down the hallway, causing her injuries. Nikki believed Shayna and encouraged her to report the abuse to the police, but Shayna decided not to take legal action. At the police station, detectives took Shayna to an interrogation room to question her about the shooting of her boyfriend, Ryan. Before starting the interview, the officers read Shayna her Miranda rights, reminding her that she had the right to have an attorney present. Shayna chose to exercise this right and asked for a lawyer to be present. While waiting in the interrogation room, Shayna filled out some paperwork under the supervision of a detective. Despite having asked for a lawyer, Shayna still chatted with the detective. When asked who the victim was, Shayna calmly replied that it was the man she had killed. This response showed a clear lack of emotion, as it was obvious she knew the victim was Ryan, her long-term boyfriend. Shayna remained in the interrogation room with the detectives, maintaining that she had acted in self-defense. She recounted the events of the previous night, describing how Ryan had allegedly grabbed her by the throat and violently thrown her around the apartment. At some point during the investigation, the detective temporarily left the room, replaced by another officer. Shayna began to reveal more details about her encounter with Ryan to this new officer. She alleged that Ryan had been extremely aggressive prior to the shooting, hurling insults at her, calling her crazy, and taunting her while brandishing a gun. Shayna believed that Ryan's behavior that night was fueled by drug use, which contributed to his violent outbursts. Throughout the interview, Shayna consistently stuck to her version of the events that culminated in the shooting. She claimed that Ryan was sitting at the dining room table, handling ammunition for his Sig Sauer pistol, when she noticed him staring aggressively at her from across the table. At that moment, she became aware of his intentions and realized he was trying to evict her from his condo. Shayna confessed to picking up the gun and firing it in the midst of the chaos, hitting Ryan with a single bullet. Shayna continued to describe the incident, claiming that after shooting Ryan once, she saw him twitching. Believing it was necessary to end his suffering, she fired multiple shots, ultimately killing him. In her confession, Shayna told the detective that Ryan was vain and had mentioned wanting a nose job, so she decided to grant him his wish. She deliberately aimed her gun at his face and pulled the trigger, essentially giving him the rhinoplasty he had requested. During the intense interrogation, Shayna expressed deep concerns about the impact of the incident on her academic performance and her future romantic relationships. She confided in the detective that having a dead boyfriend would make it difficult for her to find someone to marry, especially if they discovered she had killed him in self-defense. Despite her statement, the detective arrested and charged her with Ryan's murder. Shayna seemed genuinely surprised by her arrest, maintaining that she had acted in self-defense. In 2015, Shayna's trial began, and the courtroom was filled with anticipation. The prosecutor compared Shayna to Jodi Arias, who had also been charged with murdering her boyfriend, Travis Alexander, emphasizing the striking similarities between the two cases. This heightened the tension in the courtroom as everyone awaited the outcome. The prosecutor argued that Shayna was fixated on her ex-boyfriend, Ryan. According to the prosecution, Ryan dominated Shayna's thoughts, and she constantly discussed him. During the trial, the prosecutor presented testimony from Ryan's friends, who described his plans to end the relationship with Shayna and his efforts to avoid her phone calls and messages. Despite this, Shayna continued to visit Ryan's condo in Highland Heights uninvited, including on the night of the murder. The prosecution introduced evidence that Ryan had scheduled a date with Audrey Bolt, a former Miss Ohio, on the night of the murder. This information supported the prosecution's theory that Shayna was driven by jealousy and anger towards Ryan's potential new love interest. Audrey Bolt testified that she was supposed to meet Ryan for drinks at a bar on the night of the murder, but he failed to appear. It wasn't until later that she learned of his murder. The prosecution also presented evidence that Ryan had repeatedly expressed his desire to end the relationship with Shayna in the days leading up to his death. Ryan had sought advice from his father, Jay, on how to handle the situation, and Jay had counseled him to be kind to Shayna to avoid a messy breakup. However, it appears that Shayna continued to exert control over Ryan on the day he was killed. The prosecution presented evidence of several text exchanges between Ryan and Shayna, in which Ryan clearly told her he did not want to see her that weekend because he had other commitments. Nevertheless, Shayna showed up uninvited at his condo, which was not unusual for her. The argument that ensued reached a boiling point when Ryan explicitly told Shayna their relationship was over and she could no longer control him. Prosecutors argued that this statement enraged Shayna, prompting her to pick up a gun and fatally shoot Ryan. During Shayna's trial for murdering Ryan, the prosecution showed a video of her being questioned by the police to suggest she was a cold-blooded killer. In the video, Shayna's calm behavior and responses seemed to back up the idea that she had intentionally taken Ryan's life. The footage showed her dancing and singing along to music, which seemed unusual for someone who had just killed their loved one in self-defense. Normally, people in such a situation would be distraught and crying due to the loss of life and the weight of their actions. The prosecution's goal in showing the video was to make Shayna appear detached and unemotional, implying that her actions were not those of someone who had acted in self-defense. They claimed that her lack of tears and carefree behavior proved her guilt. However, this interpretation was open to debate and up to the jury to decide. In the end, the video was a key piece of evidence in the prosecution's case against Shayna, but it was just one part of the evidence presented during the trial. Shayna's defense team stuck to a clear storyline throughout her trial, arguing that Ryan was the aggressive and violent one on the night of the incident, leading Shayna to shoot him. To back up this claim, they built a picture of Ryan's mental state, suggesting that a mix of drugs he was taking, including anti-anxiety medications and amphetamines, contributed significantly to his behavior. The defense team presented the jury with autopsy results showing the presence of these drugs in Ryan's system, strengthening their argument that the drugs influenced his actions. An expert toxicologist testified for Shayna, stating that a combination of drugs like anti-anxiety medications and amphetamines could cause someone to become violent and paranoid. This testimony aimed to provide a reasonable explanation for Shayna's actions, implying that she may not have intended to harm Ryan. During Shayna's trial in April 2015, the prosecution grew increasingly worried that she might be acquitted due to being a smart, young, and attractive woman, and that her self-defense claim might persuade the jury. However, on April 23rd, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, convicting Shayna of murdering her boyfriend, Ryan Poston. At the August 2015 sentencing hearing, Shayna persisted in shifting the blame for Ryan's death onto him, which infuriated his friends and family. Despite the overwhelming evidence presented during the trial, Shayna stuck to her claim of innocence and refused to acknowledge her role in the events. Under Kentucky law, a defendant who is deemed a victim of domestic violence can be eligible for early parole after serving just 20% of their sentence. However, the judge in this case ruled that Shayna did not meet the criteria, characterizing her crime as a premeditated murder. As a result, the judge handed down a 40-year prison sentence, making Shayna eligible for parole in 17 years, when she will be 41 years old in 2032. Shayna Hubers was sentenced, but she appealed for a new trial, which was granted by a judge in August 2016. The reason for the appeal was that one of the jurors had failed to disclose their felony conviction, which is against Kentucky law since felons are not allowed to serve on juries. Following a 4-month delay, Shayna's second trial for the murder of Ryan Poston began in August 2018. During the opening arguments, Shayna's defense attorney claimed that throughout her year-and-a-half-long relationship with Ryan, Shayna tried her best to make him happy. However, their romance suffered because of it. The attorney stated that on the very first night Shayna and Ryan met, he was violent toward her, both physically and sexually. This incident had a lasting effect on her, and it took her several weeks to respond to his messages after that. Shayna's defense lawyers claimed that her high school experience of sexual assault led to a history of alcohol abuse and promiscuity. They argued that this traumatic event contributed to her behavior on the night of the murder. The defense team aimed to create a sympathetic image of Shayna, highlighting her troubled past and arguing that she was not responsible for her actions on the night of the murder. They sought to challenge the prosecution's narrative, suggesting that her behavior was the result of a combination of factors, including a history of abuse and a toxic relationship with Ryan. The defense portrayed Shayna as a victim of domestic violence at Ryan's hands, rather than as a cold-blooded murderer. They claimed that her actions were driven not by a desire for revenge or financial gain, but by years of abuse by her former partner. According to the defense, Ryan constantly criticized Shayna about her weight and chest size, pressuring her to enlarge her breasts. This constant pressure contributed to her low self-esteem and feelings of inadequacy, the defense argued. The defense claimed that Ryan and Shayna's sexual relationship was troubled, marked by frequent disagreements and frustration from both parties. According to the defense, Ryan yearned for a more romantic and intimate connection, but this desire was not fulfilled, leading to a growing rift between them. To support this claim, the defense presented evidence that Shayna had sought an injection to improve her romantic life, which was meant to address the couple's sexual difficulties and strengthen their bond. However, the defense argued that Ryan's consistent rejection and disinterest worsened the strain on their relationship, causing Shayna to become increasingly frustrated and isolated. Moreover, the defense alleged that Ryan often broke up with Shayna, only to engage in conversations with other women. In contrast, the prosecution stated that while Ryan Poston was not a perfect boyfriend, he was not abusive. They argued that Shayna did not act in self-defense when she fatally shot Ryan, but rather because he had ended their relationship that night. The prosecution claimed that it was time for Ryan to break up with Shayna, as she refused to leave him alone despite the breakup, demonstrating her inability to move on from the relationship. One of Ryan's co-workers testified that the breakup between Ryan and Shayna would be permanent this time because Ryan had always avoided breaking up with Shayna in person. According to the co-worker, Shayna had made every effort to keep Ryan. The prosecution presented text messages in which Shayna told her friends that she and Ryan's romantic encounters had brought them closer together. However, Shayna testified that these encounters had actually driven them apart. In another text message exchange, Shayna asked Ryan for sex, but Ryan was taking antidepressants, which had reduced his sex drive due to the medication's side effects. However, when Shayna testified, she claimed that Ryan had forced her into sexual intercourse. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Shayna guilty of murdering Ryan, despite contradictory testimonies and conflicting evidence. During the sentencing hearing, Shayna's mother emotionally addressed the judge, sharing stories of her daughter's singing talent, which had earned her multiple college scholarships. Through tears, she begged the jury to consider granting Shayna parole, arguing that her daughter still had the potential to positively impact people's lives. The mother acknowledged, however, that her pleas did not minimize the grief and pain experienced by Ryan Poston's family. Shayna was given a life sentence with no chance of parole. As part of her sentence, she must serve at least 17 years before becoming eligible for parole in 2032. She is currently serving her sentence at the Kentucky Correctional Institute for Women in Pewee Valley, Kentucky. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Gabriela Alcano. Gabriela Alcano was born on May 17, 2001, in Santiago, the capital city of Chile. She was the only child of Federico Alino and Carolina Donosa Campos, and the first grandchild in a large, close-knit family. Her paternal uncle, Rodrigo, who served as her godfather, and her grandfather, Carlos, both adored her deeply, with Carlos regarding her as the central figure in his life. Gabriela grew up in a loving and supportive environment, despite her family's modest means. Her parents, though not wealthy, worked hard to provide her with a good education and upbringing. When Gabriela was 5, her parents divorced, and she lived with her mother, who dedicated herself to raising her. Her father, however, remarried and had 2 younger sons, but he continued to support Gabriela and her mother financially and remained involved in her life. Gabriela was a sweet and friendly child who was a bit shy but made friends easily. Her gentle nature and lovely appearance earned her admiration from those around her. She excelled academically, enjoyed music, dance, and art, and her parents encouraged her talents. Gabriela cherished her relationships with her younger half-brothers, spending quality time with them at her father's nearby home during weekends and holidays. Overall, Gabriela's childhood was a happy and carefree time, filled with love and support from her family. Gabriela's first love was at the age of 15. She fell for Fabian Chasis Aravan, a fellow student who was a year older. At first, their relationship was innocent and sweet. They would walk together, share ice cream, and steal kisses. Fabian came from a good family with well-respected parents who valued education and raised him to be a good person. However, Fabian was a quiet and private person who struggled with social interactions. He would avoid eye contact and turn away from others, leading many to think he was just shy. Gabriela's father met Fabian and thought he was a calm, dependable, and responsible young man. He had a serious talk with Fabian, asking him to take care of Gabriela, and Fabian promised to do so. Initially, Fabian made an effort to be attentive and caring. However, as time passed, a different side of Fabian emerged. He became controlling and cruel, revealing a darker aspect of his personality. Fabian's controlling behavior dominated the relationship. He was intensely jealous and dictated who Gabriela could and couldn't interact with. He monitored her phone activity, insisting on instant responses to his calls and messages, regardless of the time. If she failed to comply, he would throw tantrums, displaying childish and abusive behavior. During the first 6 months of their relationship, Gabriela attempted to downplay Fabian's frequent outbursts of anger and jealousy, believing they would eventually subside. Blinded by her love for him, she tried to meet all his demands and held on to the hope that he would revert to the caring and gentle person she initially fell in love with. Fabian's behavior became increasingly irritable, volatile, and aggressive. He emotionally drained Gabriela, progressing from verbal abuse to physical mistreatment. He would slap her, pull her hair, or grab her hands, often leaving no visible marks. However, bruises would occasionally appear on her wrists and shoulders, evidence of Fabian's rough handling. Gabriela tried to hide her situation, but her loved ones noticed her depressed state and frequent tears. She was no longer her usual cheerful and outgoing self, instead withdrawing from friends and avoiding contact with people Fabian had forbidden her from seeing. Gabriela repeatedly tried to end her relationship with Fabian, but he would not let her go. Despite her efforts to break free, he would pressure her into getting back together. This cycle of breaking up and reuniting continued for over a year, marked by Fabian's stalking, threats, and harassment. In 2017, Fabian got into trouble for physically attacking a classmate outside of school. Although the details of the incident were unclear, he was accused of mistreatment and assault, which could have led to jail time. However, the case was settled out of court, and Fabian was expelled from school. He was forced to complete his education through homeschooling. When Gabriela finally decided to end the relationship for good, Fabian became angry and desperate. He apologized and promised to change, begging her to take him back. However, when she refused, he began to stalk and harass her. He would show up at her school or home, even attempting to climb into her room through the window. He bombarded her with dozens of calls, texts, voice messages, and social media messages, trying to intimidate her into resuming their relationship. Gabriella was determined to end the relationship, despite Fabian's erratic behavior. His messages veered wildly from apologetic to threatening, but she remained resolute. However, Fabian's actions were unpredictable and frightening. He would often vanish for weeks, giving Gabriella a glimmer of hope that he had moved on, only to reappear and resume his harassment. Fabian's behavior was relentless and intrusive. He would follow Gabriella everywhere, showing up unexpectedly and causing public scenes. His outbursts were loud and intimidating, leaving Gabriella feeling anxious and fearful. As a result, she became reluctant to be alone, always seeking the company of friends or family after school. She would often meet her mother at work and travel home with her, or ask her father or uncle to accompany her on trips. This constant vigilance took a toll on Gabriella, leaving her exhausted and drained over several months. A devastating series of events began to unfold for the Alcano family when a burglar broke into the home of Federico's second wife, taking her life in a tragic turn of events. At the time, the children were at school and Federico was at work, leaving her alone and vulnerable. Fortunately, the perpetrator, a neighbor with a prior conviction, was apprehended immediately. Gabriella and her mother rallied around Federico, offering emotional support and helping him care for the children during this difficult time. Although Gabriella's thoughts were temporarily diverted from Fabian, who had gone missing around the same time, she remained focused on her own goals. She was busy preparing for entrance exams, hoping to secure a spot at one of Santiago's most prestigious universities, where she aspired to study journalism or advertising. However, this tragedy was only the beginning of a series of heartbreaking events that would soon befall the Alcano family. In May 2018, Fabian suddenly re-emerged, beginning a campaign of obsessive stalking that made Gabriella feel unsafe in all aspects of her life. He was able to access her property by climbing over the fence and even showed up at places she regularly visited, such as the supermarket and the mall. By early June, Gabriella was so alarmed by his behavior that she sent screenshots of her disturbing messages with Fabian to her two closest friends, including audio recordings where he explicitly threatened her and demanded they restart their relationship. Gabriella was secretly living in fear for her own safety and that of her loved ones, but she chose not to share her concerns with her family to avoid causing them unnecessary worry. On June 10, 2018, the Alino family came together to celebrate a milestone birthday, Carlos's 80th. Tragically, this joyful gathering would turn out to be the last day of life for Gabriella and her mother, Carolina. The evening had begun on a happy note, with the house filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of a big family meal. As they celebrated Carlos's special day, everyone wished him good health and many more years to come. Gabriella played with her younger brothers and her uncle Rodrigo's children, but despite the festive atmosphere, she seemed somewhat preoccupied and distant. Her uncle noticed her unease and decided to approach her, asking if everything was okay and if something was troubling her. Gabriella gave a sad smile and shrugged, but didn't explain why she was nervous. Her uncle chose not to pry, thinking she would open up when she was ready. However, he later regretted not pressing her for more information. After the party, Federico drove his ex-wife and daughter home. He kissed Gabriella on the forehead, told her he loved her, and reassured her that she could always count on him for support. He then returned home with his younger children. Tragically, this was the last time he saw his eldest daughter and first wife alive. In the early hours of June 11th, a horrific crime took place. Fabian, armed with a hunting knife, climbed over the fence of his ex-girlfriend's house. He planned to sneak into Gabriella's bedroom through the window and attack her. However, just as he was about to enter, the lights turned on, and the back door creaked open. Carolina, who had been unable to sleep, had gotten up to investigate the noise. Fabian pounced on her, pushing her back inside, and began stabbing her repeatedly. Fabian brutally stabbed his Carolina 36 times, with most of the wounds inflicted on her chest, neck, and head. This attack was fatal and left her with no chance of survival. Carolina only managed to scream a couple of times before falling silent. The noise from the attack woke up Gabriella, who rushed downstairs to see what was happening. As she went down, she saw Fabian, covered in blood and clearly enraged. He caught hold of her and dragged her down. Gabriella was desperately trying to call the emergency services with her phone, but she couldn't make the call. In a horrific act, Fabian attacked Carolina and stabbed her once in the chest, piercing her heart and instantly killing her. He then moved her body to the kitchen. After the murder, Fabian tried to cover his tracks by wiping away his fingerprints and cleaning the bloody footprints. He also washed himself and the knife in the bathroom. After cleaning up, Fabian left the house quietly around 5:30 a.m. without being noticed by the neighbors. Following the event, Federico appeared unaffected. However, concerns grew when Carolina, typically a reliable and communicative colleague, missed work for 2 consecutive days without answering her phone. Her employer contacted Federico, asking him to find out what had happened to Carolina. When questioned, Federico was surprised and claimed to have called Carolina, but she was unreachable, as was Gabriella, whose phone was off. Next, Federico phoned his brother, Rodrigo, but Rodrigo stated that he had neither seen nor heard from the missing individuals since their friend's birthday. Following the phone call, Federico decided to pay a visit to Carolina's home. The property appeared uninhabited. Nonetheless, Carolina's vehicle remained in the garage. Without forcibly entering, despite possessing a spare key, Federico merely checked on the status of the property. Federico called the police and asked them to check the house, but he didn't enter himself because he was afraid of what he might find. The police officers were puzzled by this, especially since he had a key. When they finally entered the house at 11 a.m., they found the lifeless bodies of Carolina and Gabriella on the kitchen floor, surrounded by pools of blood. Despite the obvious fact that the women had been dead for over a day, Federico was overcome with grief and irrationally demanded that the police call an ambulance to save them. The police had to calm Federico down, but his behavior raised suspicions, and they took him outside to a police car for questioning. When he tried to leave the car and found the door locked, he became agitated and demanded to know why. It was then that he realized he was the main suspect in the double homicide. Federico was shocked and devastated by this turn of events, unable to comprehend how he could be suspected of killing his own daughter. Rodrigo arrived shortly after and was equally shocked to learn that his brother had not been released. He was also struggling to come to terms with the investigation revealed that Gabriella's friends reported that she was being stalked by her ex-boyfriend, Fabian. Screenshots of his threatening messages and voice recordings, which included a disturbing phrase, "It's easier to take her life than to let her go," were also obtained. This came as a shock to Federico, Gabriella's father, who recalled that Fabian seemed pleasant when they first met, despite his daughter's failed attempts to break up with him. The contrast between the heinous crime and the normalcy of Fabian's daily life, where he spent time with family and friends and posted light-hearted photos on social media, made his crime all the more inconceivable. After being taken into custody, Fabian responded to allegations with pretended astonishment and anguish, falsely claiming his innocence and feigning affection for Gabriella. Fabian had gotten rid of the object used to commit the murder and thrown away some clothes with blood on them. However, there were still small drops of blood on his shoes, and footprints matching his shoes were found at the scene of the crime. Additionally, 4 of Gabriella's classmates said they heard Fabian threaten her, saying it would be easier to kill her than let her go. Because of the evidence and what the witnesses said, Fabian admitted to the crime, but tried to make himself look like a lover who was deeply hurt. The defendant claimed that his intention was not to harm Gabriella, but rather to have a conversation with her. However, the situation escalated, and he ultimately treated her mother as an unwanted witness. He struggled to provide a reasonable explanation for bringing a hunting knife to the encounter, which was supposedly meant to be a conversation. Following the autopsy and other necessary examinations, the victims' bodies were released to their family for burial. A large crowd gathered at the funeral to pay their respects to the deceased and offer condolences to their loved ones. Gabriella was laid to rest in a white dress she had always wanted to wear but never had the chance to. Coralina was buried in a closed casket due to the severe mutilation of her face. Fabian's family hired a skilled lawyer who developed a strong defense strategy, aiming to secure a minimal sentence for his client. During the initial court hearings, the lawyer highlighted Fabian's young age and clean record, pointing out that the attack on his classmate had been resolved outside of court. However, the victim's family pushed for a more severe charge of femicide, which was rejected by the prosecution due to the specific requirements of Chile's law. Since Fabian and the victim were not in a romantic relationship at the time of the crime, the case did not meet the criteria for femicide. The lawyer also argued that Fabian had acted on impulse and was in a state of distress when he committed the crime. As a result, Fabian faced a potential 15-year sentence for the double homicide and assault charges. The victim's family, understandably, demanded the maximum punishment for Fabian. After the initial hearings, the judge gave both the prosecution and defense 6 months to gather evidence. Fabian's lawyer requested his release pending trial, but the judge denied this request, keeping Fabian in custody. Gabriella's father was furious. He lost 2 loved ones to violent deaths. Now, the person responsible for the murders of his ex-wife and daughter might receive a lenient sentence. The defense lawyer tried to blame the victims, and the authorities seemed willing to accept this excuse. In response, Gabriella's father and uncle, along with women's rights groups, proposed Gabriella's Law. This law would broaden the definition of femicide to include intimate partner violence, regardless of whether they was married or cohabiting. The National Office for Women and Gender Equality soon joined the cause, actively pushing for the law. Although the bill faced opposition due to concerns that it could lead to new charges and stricter penalties for perpetrators already in prison, feminist groups nationwide rallied behind the Alino family. They organized marches and demonstrations in support of Gabriella's Law. In August 2019, a year and 3 months after the tragic murders, significant changes were made to Chile's femicide law. Known as Gabriella's Law, these amendments aimed to strengthen the country's response to violence against women. The law now defines femicide as any act of violence, injury, or murder committed against a woman due to hatred based on her gender, regardless of the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator. Additionally, the law considers it an aggravating circumstance if the victim is a minor or has health issues. In April 2022, Fabian Ceres went on trial for attacking his ex-girlfriend and her mother 4 years earlier. Thanks to Gabriella's Law, the defense had limited options. Fabian was charged with femicide under aggravating circumstances because one of the victims was a minor, as well as with double homicide and assault. On April 20th, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict was delivered, Federico and Rodrigo spoke to the court, expressing their gratitude to the judges for their fair decision. They acknowledged that no punishment could restore the life of their loved ones, Carolina and Gabriella, but emphasized that a life sentence for the perpetrator would serve as a safeguard, protecting other women from suffering a similar tragic fate. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Marcos Matsunaga. Marcos Matsunaga was a successful Brazilian entrepreneur who inherited a family business that became one of the largest food product companies in the country. The company, Yoki, was founded by his grandfather, Yoshizo Kadano, who immigrated to Brazil and started a small flour milling business in the mid-20th century. Over time, the company grew and transformed into a global brand with a wide range of products. Marcos was born into a wealthy family and was accustomed to getting everything he wanted from a young age. Marcos didn't have to start from scratch to build his business, as he inherited the family food company from his grandfather and father. As the CEO, Marcos had the opportunity to become the first billionaire in his family, a goal he pursued for most of his life. However, this ambition was not meant to be fulfilled. Those who knew Marcos personally described him as a skilled and successful businessman who not only preserved but also significantly increased the family's wealth, boosting profits. However, he was also known for being difficult to work with, having a strong personality, and being controlling towards those around him. Marcos was not handsome, he was obese since childhood. He had to wear glasses due to vision problems, short stature, and somewhat clumsy. All of these caused Marcos a lot of problems when communicating with friends, leading to a lack of friends and isolation. Despite his wealth and business success, Marcos found it difficult to establish a meaningful relationship. His arrogance and egoism often repelled women, making it hard for him to connect with someone beyond a few dates. Consequently, he frequently relied on the services of escorts, as his wealth and status were not enough to make him a desirable partner. Very little information is publicly available about the entrepreneur's first wife. What is known is that their marriage was not based on romance or passion, but rather necessity and family pressure. The marriage endured for several years, although both spouses soon came to regret their decision to start a family. Initially, the young wife tried to accommodate her husband's complicated personality, hoping they would eventually form a supportive and loving partnership. However, her expectations were unfulfilled, and they gradually grew further apart. The businessmen primarily sought companionship on websites where women offered intimate services in exchange for money. Elise was one of these women, a call girl with profiles on multiple platforms. He came across her profile, a gorgeous blonde with a great figure, and began booking her services regularly, paying her handsomely for their time together. Elise was 6 years younger than him. She grew up in a poor and troubled home in a crime-ridden part of the city. Her family life was unstable, she never knew her father, her mother struggled with addiction, and her mother's partners often had similar issues. As a result, Eliza's childhood was marked by hardship and unhappiness. She was frequently beaten, harassed, and abused by her mother's partners from a young age. As soon as she finished school, Elise left home and never looked back. She pursued a career in nursing, landing a job at a hospice after completing her training. However, she soon realized that caring for terminally ill patients was not her true calling. Elise formed strong bonds with her patients. A few years later, Elise decided to pursue higher education and switch careers. She chose law, which she saw as a promising field that would open doors to new opportunities. After lengthy preparation, she scored well enough on the entrance exams to gain admission. However, she struggled to pay tuition fees with her limited income as a nurse. Since Elise had no family support, having cut off ties with her relatives after leaving home, she had to fend for herself. To make money, she decided to take advantage of her appearance. She registered on a website that provided intimate services, where she was helped to create an attractive profile. Soon, wealthy customers began to notice Eliza's beauty. Elise worked as an escort to finance her studies and support herself. Once she completed her education and secured a job in her field, she planned to leave the sex work industry. That's when she met Marcos, a regular client who showered her with gifts and openly met with her. Unbeknownst to Elise, their relationship would take a dramatic turn. Marcos, a wealthy married man, would eventually leave his wife for Elise, transforming her rags-to-riches story into a real-life fairy tale. Marcos completely lost himself over Elias, but it's unclear whether Elias actively pursued him or not. After about 6 months, Marcos realized he didn't just want to date Elias, but to be with her long-term. Without hesitation, he filed for divorce from his first wife and began introducing Elias as his fiancée to everyone. Marcos, as a businessman, preferred to keep the true nature of their relationship and Elias's occupation private. So, they came up with a cover story, claiming they met by chance at a cafe. They stuck to this story, even with Marcos's closest relatives and friends, who remained none the wiser. When Elias joined the Matsunaga family, she didn't exactly receive a warm welcome. Her in-laws suspected that she had used her charm to win over Marcos, an older, wealthy, but not particularly attractive man. They believed she was now pretending to ignore his abrasive personality in order to secure her new status. Despite their reservations, no one strongly opposed Marcos's decision to divorce his first wife and marry Elias. A lavish, traditional wedding was planned, complete with a white wedding dress, numerous guests, and a multi-tiered cake. Afterwards, Marcos moved his new wife into his grand, luxurious mansion, where she became the lady of the house. Matsunaga was a well-known collector of luxury items, particularly expensive wines and rare weapons. His house featured a large wine cellar, where bottles were meticulously organized by year and country of origin. Additionally, the house had a secret room dedicated to his collection of firearms and edged weapons, which were proudly displayed on the walls from floor to ceiling. Marcos took great pride in his extensive collections and was always on the lookout for new additions. His home was a treasure trove of antiques, luxury items, and modern art, which were displayed throughout the house, often in a way that was more cluttered than curated. Soon after the wedding, they decided that they were ready to have an heir, but despite all their efforts, Elias did not get pregnant naturally. Then they decided to resort to the procedure of in vitro fertilization, but even here, success awaited them far from immediately. However, when their daughter was finally born, their joy knew no bounds. They devoted themselves to raising their child, making plans for her future, and as she grew older, the family began to travel the world, immersing themselves in different cultures and traditions. Their daughter was a beloved and pampered child, raised with love, care, and every luxury imaginable. When Elias entered his life, she surprised him by showing a willingness to learn about hunting. Together, they visited shooting ranges, where she became proficient in handling firearms. Eventually, they ventured into the woods to hunt wild animals. Elias approached hunting as a competitive challenge, unfazed by the act of taking animal lives. Marcos appreciated her mindset and enjoyed watching her skillfully wield her weapons and stalk prey. Marcos taught Elias various outdoor skills, including how to skin and carve wild animals such as boars, deer, and other forest creatures. Together, they would dissect the animals using large knives, cleavers, and axes to separate the body parts. Unconventionally, the family did not keep traditional pets like cats or dogs. Instead, they kept poisonous snakes in specially designed terrariums that mimicked their natural habitats. This was a long-held dream of Marcos, who had a passion for snakes, but his first wife had never approved of the idea of having a terrarium in their home. Elias had successfully adopted Marcos's unusual hobbies, which had grown on Elias. In the spring of 2012, Marcos was on the verge of making a significant deal that would take his wealth and career to a new level, potentially making him a billionaire. He was in active negotiations with several partners to sell the family business and invest the substantial proceeds in a new and profitable venture. On May 19, 2012, the day before a billion-dollar deal was set to close, entrepreneur Marcos vanished without warning. His wife, Elias, didn't report him missing until the next day because she thought he was at work. According to Elias, Marcos had a meeting scheduled for the evening that was expected to run late into the night. He had packed some belongings and told her he would likely spend the night at the office before heading straight to the deal the next morning. When Marcos failed to return home and stopped answering his phone the next day, Elias grew concerned and reported him missing. The police quickly discovered that the entrepreneur had missed an evening meeting and a crucial morning meeting that he couldn't afford to skip. This led to immediate speculation that the millionaire had been kidnapped, and it was likely that his family would receive ransom demands in the coming hours. However, 24 hours passed, followed by another day, with no ransom demands received. As a result, hopes of finding Marcos alive began to dwindle. Meanwhile, investigators were actively questioning the businessman's relatives, friends, and business partners to identify potential enemies and determine who could benefit from his disappearance or the disruption of the impending deal. Despite a thorough investigation, no one has found anyone who would have wanted to kill Marcos. He was a capable and forward-thinking businessman who made strategic decisions that often benefited everyone involved. Days later, Elias visited her in-laws with her daughter and revealed a secret she had been too afraid to share with the police. With tears in her eyes, she explained that her husband had been having an affair with a woman named Natasha Villalima and had made no effort to hide it. Although the situation had led to several heated arguments and threats of divorce, Marcos had eventually promised to end the affair in order to save their family. Marcos continued to see Natasha, but was more cautious to avoid another family scandal. However, Elias suspected he was having an affair and hired a private investigator to gather evidence. The investigator obtained photos and videos of Marcos's romantic dates with Natasha. Notably, he took Natasha to the same restaurants and entertainment venues that he and his wife frequented, where he was very popular. It seemed that Marcos was deliberately showing his disdain for his wife and openly cheating on her without any attempt to hide it. It was later discovered that Natasha Lima was found on the same intimate services website where Marcos first met his wife, Elias. They dated for about 5 months, during which time he showered her with expensive gifts, including a luxury car, and paid her a large sum of money to delete her online profile. Meanwhile, Elias discovered incriminating photos and videos of Marcos's infidelity and showed them to his parents. She also revealed that she had confronted Marcos with the evidence just a day before his disappearance, but instead of apologizing, he abruptly packed his things, informed Elias that he was leaving her, and disappeared without a word. According to Elias, Marcos had simply given in to his passion and abandoned his life to be with his new mistress. However, those who knew him best vehemently disagreed, insisting that Marcos would never abandon his business, which his family had spent decades building, as he was deeply invested in its success. A gruesome discovery was made by a passerby about a week later, when scattered garbage bags were found in a remote area approximately 100 kilometers from the missing Marcos's house. Upon examination of the bags, police discovered human remains which were identified as Marcos Matsunaga, a person for whom an extensive national search was ongoing. Forensic examination concluded the victim had died as a result of a shot to the head before the perpetrator cut and packaged his dismembered remains. Expert assessment also inferred that only an exceptionally skilled practitioner would possess sufficient know-how, steady-handedly controlling either precise butcher's cut tools at convenient knife handles anatomy. The investigation began by reviewing the last known location of the deceased man, Marcos. This led authorities to the luxury residential complex where Marcos lived with his wife and daughter. The complex was equipped with multiple security cameras, which were thoroughly examined. A review of the footage revealed that the evening before Marcos disappeared, he and his wife had ordered food delivery. The elevator camera captured Marcos going down to the first floor to collect the food, returning with pizza boxes in hand. He then entered his apartment and was not seen leaving again that evening, night, or the following day. It appeared as though Marcos vanished into thin air. Elias leaves their apartment with 3 large, heavy suitcases. Investigators, who already had suspicions, take her into custody for questioning. At first, she denies any involvement in her husband's disappearance, sticking to her initial claim that he left her for another woman. However, when shown footage of her moving the suitcases, she breaks down and confesses. According to her, their marriage had been troubled for some time, and her husband had become increasingly abusive. Marcos would constantly humiliate her, criticize her for her past work as an escort, and claimed that she was a bad mother to their daughter. Marcos exerted total control over his wife Eliza, not even allowing her to make friends. When she once mentioned divorce, Marcos threatened to leave her with nothing, take their child, and prevent her from seeing him. On the evening of the incident, Eliza showed Marcos pictures from a detective, which depicted him with his mistress. Instead of remorse, Marcos became enraged and slapped Eliza. She claims that everything after that was a blur. The next thing Eliza remembers is holding a gun, which she used to shoot her husband. Upon realizing what had happened, she decided to dispose of the body to make it seem like Marcos had vanished. Eliza drew upon her experience as a nurse and knowledge of human anatomy to do so. Additionally, Marcos had previously taught her how to skin and dismember animal carcasses, and they had the necessary tools at home. After Eliza killed her husband, she dismembered and bagged his body while their young daughter slept in the next room. It was later discovered that the evidence of her husband's infidelity, which included photos and videos, was only received by Eliza on May 20th, after she had already murdered him. This evidence was provided by a private detective. Eliza then used this evidence to deceive her husband's parents, telling them that he had abandoned her for his mistress. The investigation also found Natasha Lima, who testified in court that Marcos had wanted a divorce but was afraid of Eliza due to her alleged mental instability and capability for violent behavior. Natasha last saw her lover the day before he disappeared. He was unhappy about the constant family scandals and planned to start a new life in Florida after selling the company. However, his wife Eliza was not part of these plans. He intended to divorce her and forget her completely. A shocking twist was the discovery of blood in the lungs of the deceased Marcos. This suggested that Marcos was still alive when Eliza decapitated him, indicating he had struggled to breathe. This contradicted Eliza's claim that he died instantly from a gunshot wound. Further examination by the pathologist revealed that the bullet had entered Marcos's head at an unusual angle. It seemed he was caught off guard, sitting or lying down when shot, and didn't try to defend himself. Eliza Matsunaga's claim that her husband attacked her and she defended herself was disputed by multiple witnesses at her trial. They testified that Marcos had a difficult personality and often spoke harshly, but he never physically harmed anyone. As a result, the court believed Eliza fabricated the story and found her guilty of premeditated murder with cruelty and attempting to conceal the crime. She received a 20-year prison sentence, which many considered too lenient. Her in-laws now care for their daughter. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jaden Parkinson. Jaden Parkinson was born in the UK on September 26, 1996, as the youngest of 3 children in a family troubled by her parents' tumultuous relationship. According to her mother, Samantha Shuri, Jaden and her siblings witnessed many unpleasant incidents. When Jaden was just 7 years old, her parents divorced, and she went to live with her father. Despite the physical distance, she remained extremely close to her mother, with whom she would talk every night over the phone, even though they lived in different places. As Jaden entered her teenage years, her life became increasingly unstable. According to Samantha, Jaden's father gave her too much freedom, allowing her to do as she pleased. As a result, she got involved with a group of people where she started smoking and drinking alcohol regularly. During this time, she alternated between living with her father and her mother. At the age of 13, she ran away from home and went to live with her mother, claiming she preferred to stay with her. In the end, the family court ruled in favor of Jaden, allowing her to remain with her mother. Jaden experienced numerous conflicts with various individuals at school, including her teachers. She resented being told what to do and having her behavior controlled. In her personal life, she was in a romantic relationship with Ben Blakely. Jaden was only 14 years old when she met Blakely, a former garbage collector. Although they didn't cohabitate since she was still a minor, he persisted in his efforts to influence her, gradually bringing about significant changes in her. Jaden was 15 when she began dating Ben, who was 20 at the time. The significant age gap understandably concerned Jaden's mother, but she was powerless to intervene. Initially, their relationship was loving and romantic, but it eventually deteriorated. The mutual understanding and affection they once shared vanished, replaced by tension and strain. Ben exerted control over every aspect of Jaden's life, dictating her appearance, from makeup to clothing choices. He isolated her from family and friends, causing Jaden to move out of her mother's house and into a hostel for women escaping domestic violence. Ben was banned from visiting the hostel, but that didn't stop him from exerting total control over her life. The couple frequently clashed, and Jaden even alerted the hostel staff that Ben had a history of aggression towards her. She was unable to make a move without his approval. Ben took her mobile phone away, convincing her that she didn't need anything or anyone else as long as she had him and his love. He prohibited her from interacting with men and monitored all her social media activity. As a result, she stopped going to school. Ben's grip on her was so tight that he even refused to let her leave her room to use the bathroom. Jaden used to have daily phone conversations with her mother, but nowadays they barely talk once or twice a month. Samantha begged her daughter to come back home and break up with Ben, but Jaden refused to listen. The reality was that Ben had a tight grip on Jaden, controlling her both emotionally and physically. There were even times when she had visible bruises on her face. On November 30th, 2013, Jaden revealed to her mother that she was pregnant, hoping the news would prompt Ben to reform his attitude towards her and his lifestyle. She believed the baby would bring them closer together, and Ben would revert to the person he was when they first met. However, Ben failed to meet her expectations. As he often did, Ben manipulated Jaden into isolating herself from friends and family, making her dependent on him alone. Without her own financial means, Jaden lost autonomy, with Ben eventually restricting her from leaving her room, even to use the bathroom. Unbeknownst to Jaden, Ben secretly dated other girls, exerting psychological and physical control over them as well. When Samantha found out her daughter Jaden was pregnant, she asked her to come back home, but Jaden refused. They had a meeting to talk it over, but Jaden was determined. She didn't want to cause her mother any more stress. After Jaden told Ben about her pregnancy, he flew into a rage and denied being the father of her baby. He even threatened to share naked photos and videos of Jaden on social media. A few days prior to her disappearance, Jaden reported Ben to the authorities, fearing he would share intimate photos and videos of her online. Ben possessed approximately 30 compromising photos and 13 explicit videos of Jaden, and she was desperate to prevent their public release. On December 3rd, Jaden failed to return to the hostel overnight, prompting the staff to launch a search effort, aware of the turmoil in her personal life. They contacted Samantha, Jaden's mother, by phone, but she was unable to provide any information about her daughter's whereabouts. Shortly after midnight on December 4th, 2013, the police received a formal missing persons report. After learning about Jaden's personal struggles, investigators attempted to reach out to Ben to see if he had any information about her disappearance. However, Ben was hostile and abruptly ended multiple calls, claiming he couldn't assist and had no idea where Jaden might be. Jaden had a troubled upbringing, marked by frequent conflicts with her family, and had a history of running away only to return home. As a result, her disappearance didn't initially seem out of the ordinary. On December 4th, the day the investigation started, police arrested Ben Blakely in the early hours, but this was not related to Jaden's disappearance. A few days earlier, Jaden had reported about Ben to the police, fearing he would post intimate photos of her online. Ben was arrested due to this incident. During his interrogation, the investigators did not know that Ben was a person of interest in Jaden Parkinson's disappearance case. Ben denied any intentions of posting Jaden's images online and was released on bail the same day. Samantha was distributing flyers featuring a picture of her daughter, Jaden, in an effort to gather information about her disappearance. She also utilized social media platforms to raise awareness about the case, hoping that someone might have witnessed something or possess knowledge about Jaden's whereabouts. While the investigation was ongoing, the police examined surveillance footage to determine Jaden's last known whereabouts. After retrieving CCTV footage from the hostel where Jaden lived, they found that she had departed to meet Ben but did not come back. This event took place on December 3rd. Additionally, Jaden was later spotted at Oxford railway station, where CCTV footage showed her walking in with Ben, and nothing out of the ordinary occurred in the video. Following their trail, investigators discovered that Ben and Jaden took a train to Didcot, a town roughly 10 miles from Oxford. The last confirmed sighting of Jaden was at Didcot train station. Surveillance footage captured the pair leaving the station. Typically, when Jaden ran away from home, she would reach out to a family member within a day or two to let them know she was safe. But this time, there was an eerie silence. As the days went by, Jaden failed to contact her family, friends, or post on social media, a stark departure from her usual behavior. Since the CCTV footage showed her boarding a train with Ben, he became the prime suspect in her disappearance. The police did not doubt that Ben knew where Jaden was and what had happened to her. The footage showed Ben returning to the train station alone, yet no one saw Jaden alive ever again. A week after Jaden's disappearance, on December 10, 2013, the police took Ben Blakely into custody. They wanted to question him to determine what happened to Jaden after they were last seen together leaving the train station in Didcot. At the time, the police considered two possible scenarios. One, that Jaden was hiding of her own free will, and two, that Ben was holding her captive against her will at an unknown location. Ben displayed confidence during the interrogation. He claimed to be unaware of his ex-girlfriend's whereabouts, identifying her as Jaden. According to Ben, they had broken up, and she was now seeing another man. He suggested that the police should focus on speaking with this new boyfriend. Ben expressed his indifference to Jaden's current situation, stating that he had moved on and had a new girlfriend. He recommended that the police check her social media to determine her location and the people she was interacting with. Ben Blakely was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and murdering Jaden, who was still missing. The police spoke to Jaden's friends to see if they knew of anywhere she might have gone, but their investigation only revealed that Jaden had drifted apart from her friends after starting a relationship with Ben. As a result, no one was aware of a potential hiding place for her. During the ongoing search for Jaden, investigators received crucial information from a taxi driver from Didcot. He said that at about 1 a.m. on December 4th, he picked up a passenger on a dirt road. He described the passenger as a young man with a large and heavy suitcase smeared with mud. The driver couldn't lift it and asked the taxi driver to help him. These circumstances made the taxi driver think about what was in the suitcase and that he could have witnessed a crime. The police investigation revealed that the taxi was summoned using Ben Blakely's mobile phone. When questioned further, Ben refused to provide any additional information. A detailed analysis of his mobile phone's location records showed that Ben had visited several sites in Didcot, including an abandoned countryside barn, which was where a taxi collected him that evening. A team of investigators, including criminologists and dog handlers, was sent to the location to conduct an investigation. It later emerged that Ben and Jaden had previously visited the area because Jaden's mother resided in Didcot, adjacent to the barn. The police discovered a bracelet that resembled the one Jaden was wearing. Trained service dogs, specialized in detecting deceased bodies, began barking inside the barn, suggesting that something was amiss, but Jaden's body was not found. This development likely had a connection to the suitcase Ben had with him when he got into the taxi. The police appealed for public assistance, requesting that anyone who saw a man carrying a large suitcase in the Didcot countryside come forward with information. Meanwhile, officers visited homes door to door and questioned residents of the houses nearest to the abandoned barn. Since the train station video footage showed Ben and Jaden were not carrying a suitcase, investigators sought to determine where Ben acquired the suitcase. On December 14th, the police finally found the answer to their question. During their investigation, they discovered that Ben Blakely's grandmother, grandfather, and younger brother Jake lived near the abandoned barn. When the police visited Ben's grandmother, the first thing she asked was if they were there about the suitcase. She explained that Ben had borrowed a suitcase from her a few days earlier, arriving in a hurry and dumping its contents on the floor without explanation. According to Ben's grandmother, he returned the suitcase 2 days later and discarded it in the barn, but it was dirty when he did so. Additionally, she mentioned that 2 shovels had gone missing, only to reappear later, covered in a thick layer of dirt. Ben's need for 2 shovels raises suspicions that he may have had an accomplice. A possible partner in crime is 17-year-old Jake Blakely, a friend of Jaden's who met Ben through their mutual friend. Several witnesses reported seeing Ben and Jake together, riding dirt bikes. As the investigation into Jaden's disappearance unfolded, Jake was arrested on suspicion of being involved in the crime. Meanwhile, the police sent the suitcase Ben had returned to his grandmother's barn to a laboratory for analysis, hoping to determine if it contained any traces of Jaden's DNA. Based on all available evidence, investigators developed a theory that Jaden was killed in an abandoned barn, then placed in a suitcase and moved to another location where the perpetrator buried her. However, due to the vast area of fields surrounding Didcot, finding Jaden's body was a daunting task. To aid in the investigation, police utilized aviation to narrow down the likely burial site. Through aerial photography, they identified 10 locations with recent significant changes to the soil surface. Although police checked several locations, it yielded no results. It wasn't until they thoroughly investigated all 10 places of interest that they finally found Jaden's body. A surprising development emerged in the case. Jake Blakely began working with the police, directing them to investigate his uncle's grave at a local cemetery in Didcot, adjacent to All Saints Church. Although the cemetery was one of 10 locations that had recently shown surface changes, it was initially considered a low priority since soil disturbances are common in such places. However, upon receiving a note from Jake suggesting that Jaden's body might be buried in his uncle's grave, the police promptly cordoned off the cemetery. Investigators were shocked by this unprecedented method of hiding a victim's body. According to reports from the English press, Ben and Jake's uncle had been buried in 2006. The new twist in this case has garnered widespread media attention. In a shocking first for the country, the victim's body was discovered in a pre-existing grave. Following the setup of a forensic tent at the cemetery, experts commenced their investigation. Tragically, Jaden's family later received the devastating news that her body had been found in the grave of Ben and Jake Blakely's uncle. She was found naked, with no clothes nearby, and her jewelry had been removed. The forensic examination revealed that Jaden had been beaten prior to her death, with finger marks on her neck indicating strangulation. The pathologist ultimately determined asphyxia to be the official cause of death. While in prison awaiting trial, Ben Blakely had a change of heart after speaking with the prison chaplain. He and his lawyer drafted a letter in which he accepted responsibility for Jaden's death, but claimed it was not premeditated. Ben's account of events was that he got into an argument with Jaden, pushed her, and she fell off a bridge near an abandoned barn. He said he tried to revive her, but was unsuccessful. Initially, He buried her body in one location, then moved it to the cemetery and reburied it in his uncle's grave. However, the autopsy results contradicted Ben's story, revealing blunt force injuries to her face and asphyxia as the cause of death, which suggested Ben was not telling the truth in an attempt to shift some of the blame. Jaden's father passed away due to heart problems before the trial commenced. On June 23, 2014, Ben Blakely appeared in court, displaying no remorse for his actions. His provocative behavior and insults towards others made it clear that he was unbothered by the fact that he had taken the life of Jaden and her unborn child. During the 4-week trial, it emerged that Blakely, of Redding Berks, was a violent and controlling boyfriend. 3 of his former girlfriends testified against him, revealing that he was controlling and violent towards them during their relationships. They alleged that he would confiscate their phones, physically assault them, and even grab them by the throat if they dared to answer back, or if he suspected them of cheating on him. The short-tempered, ginger-haired murderer's outbursts were evident throughout the trial. The judge repeatedly warned him for using foul language in the dock and while on the witness stand, where he continuously shouted at prosecutor Richard Leam and used profanities. His fits of rage were too overwhelming for Jaden's mother and other relatives, who were forced to leave the courtroom in tears on several occasions. Judge Patrick Eccles even had to remove Ben from the courtroom one day, sending him to the cells, and continued the trial in his absence. Although Jake Blakely is under 18, Judge Eccles decided to allow his name to be reported in the media because he believed it was important for the public to know. Jake has admitted to perverting the course of justice, but claims he thought he was burying either weapons or dead animals at the time. His sibling Ben had promised to give him an Xbox game console and £100 if he carried out the malicious act. The jury viewed CCTV footage that showed Ben and Jaden entering an Oxford train station and boarding a train to Didcot. The footage also revealed Blakely returning alone, looking down in an apparent attempt to conceal his face. According to the prosecutor, the crime was premeditated. The argument is that Blakely deliberately lured Jaden to a secluded location, an abandoned barn in another town, where he could take her life without being seen. What other plausible reason could there be for him to take Jaden to such a location after discovering she was pregnant? Jaden was eager to start anew, but Blakely had grown accustomed to controlling every facet of her life and would not relinquish his grip. Moreover, he was unwilling to become a father. The jury deliberated for 20 hours before reaching a verdict, with 11 out of 12 members agreeing. Ben Blakely was found guilty of intentionally taking Jaden Parkinson's life. According to the judge, Jaden finally found the courage to end the relationship in November last year, but Ben Blakely responded by threatening to post intimate photographs online to humiliate her. In an unrelated case, the court had previously sentenced Jake Blakely, Ben's younger brother, to 3 years in prison for perverting the course of justice in July 2014. Ben Blakely, on the other hand, was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Stephen Freeman. The victim, Stephen Andrew Freeman, was born on January 1, 1995, in Thomason, Georgia, to Troy and Jennifer Freeman. He and his brother Blake grew up as happy, healthy children without any problems with their parents or society. Kind and responsive, Stephen had many friends, and everyone described him as an exceptionally calm and balanced person. Stephen grew up in Griffin, where he later attended Spalding High School and Gordon State College to complete his education. Mary Catherine Higdon was also raised in a respectable family, somewhat carefree, impetuous, humorous, and friendly. She was drawn to creativity. She often put on mini plays and performed them in front of her family and neighbors. Mary and Stephen fell in love with each other in their senior years and have been inseparable since. The young couple had a lot of common interests. Both loved being in nature. They went hiking, fishing, and even hunting together. In 2012, Stephen Freeman updated his Facebook status to indicate he was in a relationship and regularly shared various photos with his partner. Mary's family was fond of her boyfriend, and Steve's parents also accepted his girlfriend as their own daughter. After graduating from school, the young couple moved in together. Stephen got a job as a plumber at Drain W Gutters and Roofing Inc., and Mary Catherine worked as a teacher's assistant at St. George's Episcopal School. She also worked part-time as a sales associate at a gun store. By the summer of 2018, Stephen and Mary had been living together for 7 years but had not gotten married. On August 1st, 2018 at 10:42 p.m., emergency services received an alarm call. The caller, 24-year-old Mary Catherine Higdon, screamed hysterically into the phone that she had accidentally shot her boyfriend. She reported grabbing a Glock 43 firearm, unaware that there was a bullet in the chamber. When paramedics and police arrived at Sunnybrook Drive, she was in a state of shock. She knelt in front of the motionless and bloodied body of the young man lying on the bed, crying incessantly, gasping and begging the doctors to help him. "I can't lose him. I can't lose him," she cried. Law enforcement officers struggled to pull Mary Catherine away from the victim to examine him and provide first aid. 23-year-old Stephen Freeman, wounded in the chest just below the neck, was still breathing. He was immediately transported to Spalding Regional Hospital. Unfortunately, a few minutes before midnight, the young man's heart stopped. Not fully comprehending the tragedy that had occurred and still in shock, Mary had to visit the police station to give her account of the events. She was called in for questioning, where she, still completely stunned, claimed that the shot was accidental. She explained that there had always been firearms in their home, and that Stephen would leave a pistol on the nightstand for self-defense before going to sleep, as their house was located outside the city. On that fateful evening, she merely wanted to hand Stephen the pistol, and it accidentally discharged. She had no idea the gun was loaded. Mary Catherine insisted that Stephen Freeman was the love of her life, and she would never harm him, especially not intentionally. Examining the scene, investigators did not rule out the possibility that the act might have been premeditated, and they had substantial arguments to support this theory. There were signs of a struggle in the kitchen, with food and dishes scattered about. Detectives Adam Trammell and Chris Wilson found Mary's story improbable and continued the investigation, examining the evidence. Mary Catherine was called in for a second interrogation, where the investigators used aggressive tactics. They yelled at her, expressed skepticism about her account, and demanded the truth. This approach was effective, and Mary Catherine confessed to shooting her boyfriend in a fit of anger. She explained that they had a heated argument, and she wanted to leave him. The investigators had recorded the conversation and obtained a confession, indicating a case that had been resolved. However, a significant technical issue arose, resulting in the loss of most of the recording, with only background interference and indistinct noises remaining. The reason for this loss and the lack of a backup copy of this crucial evidence remained unexplained. Further investigation revealed that the pistol could not have been fired accidentally, as it required a deliberate trigger pull. Additionally, for the bullet to have struck Stephen in the way it did, the pistol had to have been pointed directly at the victim. Detectives also closely examined Mary's behavior, with some suspecting that she may have been overacting and exaggerating her distress. The detectives remained diligent, carefully piecing together their theory of the tragedy based on the emerging evidence and proof. Another critical fact cast doubt on the accident in Mary Catherine's words. Investigators learned that she worked at a gun store, where employees undergo thorough training on handling various firearms before starting work. This meant she undoubtedly knew how to safely hand over a pistol without causing harm. The picture of an accident didn't align with the new facts that the investigation uncovered. She changed her statement several times, and her hysterical state sometimes interrupted the interrogation. However, she reiterated that it was an accident. In another conversation, Mary Catherine told the police that at Stephen's request, she tossed the pistol to hand it to him, and the weapon accidentally discharged. This did not match what she had told the investigators at the scene and during the first interrogation, where she repeatedly stated that she was simply handing Stephen the pistol hand to hand, not tossing it, and that's when it accidentally fired below his neck. These changing statements worked against Mary Catherine as she was caught lying, and every word was scrutinized for hidden intent, indicating guilt or concealment. Mary was detained and held in the Spalding County Jail during her trial. She was charged with felony murder, malice murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm while committing a crime. Lieutenant Wilson strongly disputed Mary's claim that it was an accident and tried to prove that her actions were a deliberate and meticulously planned act. A new piece of evidence in this case was common cooking grease found on the slide of the pistol. The slide also had lubricant, suggesting that at some point, the magazine must have been emptied, bullets were loaded, and the pistol was then placed on a shelf. In her defense, Mary Catherine told the police that she was indeed preparing dinner for Stephen that evening, and the dinner found scattered on the kitchen floor explained the presence of grease on the slide. Subsequent interrogations of the couple's relatives and friends did not provide the clarity expected in this case. Many friends claimed that this teenage love turned into a roller coaster ride for Stephen and Mary, until their relationship nearly ended and then reignited with new passion. It became genuinely complicated in recent years. The lovers often argued over emerging disagreements. Mary turned every argument into a dramatic event, screaming at Stephen and attacking him, after which he often left the house to spend the night with friends, turning off his phone as Mary continued to call and text him. She tried to control his every move, driving Stephen to frustration. The guy shared with friends that during arguments and fights, Mary pointed a pistol at him or herself, threatening to end her life or his. Stephen never reported this to the police, fearing Mary would be jailed. And this was not the only instance when Mary resorted to using a weapon. There were plenty of weapons in their home. During an interrogation, Stephen's friend Thomas Skinner shared that 2 days before the tragedy on July 30th, 2018, Stephen and Mary Catherine exchanged warm messages, wishing each other a good day. The next day, July 31st, Stephen told his mother that he would not return home to that devil, and stayed the night at Thomas's place. On August 1st, 2018, when Stephen didn't come home to sleep, Mary sent him hundreds of messages begging him to return. That evening, she prepared dinner and waited for her beloved. From Stephen's mother, she learned he was at his friend Thomas's place and went to pick him up. She encountered them on the road and, rolling down the window, shouted that she was waiting for him at home for dinner. Stephen replied that he was coming home. The evening, instead of a reconciliatory dinner, ended in tragedy. The police believed the case was closed as a premeditated act driven by Mary Catherine's anger. However, her defense team revealed another side to the young couple's life known to few. On June 17, 2019, almost a year after Stephen's death, his beloved Mary Catherine Higdon stood trial. Before the hearing, Mary Higdon was offered a plea deal for life imprisonment with the possibility of parole if she pleaded guilty. However, she refused the deal, insisting she could never harm Stephen because he was the love of her life. At the initial hearings, Mary Higdon defended herself vehemently, repeatedly claiming it was an accident and that she loved Stephen Freeman. She also surprised many by accusing her boyfriend of abusive behavior towards her, claiming he hit her twice and even forced himself on her on the day of the tragedy, and she had to defend herself. It turned out the couple's relationship had been deteriorating over some time. Friends and relatives claimed Mary Higdon was furious because Stephen often ignored her messages and calls. She demanded attention and pursued him, especially insistently lately. Allegedly, on the night of the incident, when Stephen Freeman finally came home, he refused to eat the dinner Mary had prepared for him, which became the last straw for her. She couldn't hold back and shot at him. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard stated in court that physical evidence supported the claim that Mary Catherine shot Stephen in anger after he didn't come home for dinner and ignored her calls and text messages. The evidence presented included the grease found on the pistol and the sheet taken from the mattress where Stephen lay bleeding. The sheet was shown as a key piece of evidence, indicating that Stephen was not attacking Mary but was sitting still in one spot. Forensic experts examined the blood stains and determined that at the moment of the shot, Stephen was not moving or approaching Mary Catherine, but was calmly sitting on the bed. If he had been moving, the blood would have been everywhere, not just in one corner of the sheet. This only confirmed that the accused's theory was once again false. In court, faced directly with the possibility of life imprisonment, and finally believing in the gravity of the situation, Mary Catherine made the risky decision to provide truthful testimony. With tears in her eyes, in front of the judge and numerous attendees, she once again portrayed Stephen Freeman as a harsh and controlling tyrant and presented specific evidence. She managed to do so, and the defense stuck to the self-defense narrative. They presented the argument that a scandal had erupted between Mary and Stephen on the evening of the tragedy, where Mary fired at him in self-defense. Mary Catherine sorrowfully shared numerous stories from her life where Stephen had hurt her. She confessed he had repeatedly hit her face, shaken her, and threatened punishment for any minor misconduct or disobedience. Living with Stephen, she experienced all kinds of imaginable pressure: verbal insults, physical attacks, and even assault. He constantly controlled and manipulated her, needing to know where she was, who she was with, what she was doing, how she was spending money, and even what she was eating. He drove her to despair with unreasonable jealousy. She never reported him to the police because she loved and feared him. The defense presented ample evidence to support their claims. This included not just text messages taken from Mary's old phone, but also correspondence that raised significant questions about who was the real tyrant and betrayer in this relationship. The text messages, dating back over a year and a half between Mary and Stephen, not only proved Stephen's harsh behavior towards Mary Catherine, but also Mary's infidelity. Some message excerpts showed Stephen insulting Mary Catherine with harsh words and threatening her with repercussions upon his return from fishing. However, the reason for his anger was that, as confirmed by his friends, he was very angry with his girlfriend for being unfaithful, which Mary denied. Mary Catherine shared that Stephen had sexually assaulted her twice, and she feared he would harm her again on August 1, 2018, leading her to act in self-defense. The defense called an expert witness and close relatives of Mary who could attest to the domestic violence. Mary's sister, Sarah Higdon, testified affirmatively, stating she saw bruises on Mary's arm 2 weeks before the shooting. She expressed regret for not photographing the injuries and believing Mary's explanation that it happened accidentally. A tearful Mary Higdon explained to the jury that on the night of the incident, she decided to break up with Stephen, telling him to leave the house. Stephen became angry and attacked her, and in self-defense, she grabbed the pistol from the nightstand and accidentally fired. After Mary Catherine's emotional testimony, the prosecution and defense engaged in a fierce battle with Stephen's former friends who had been close to Mary for years, desperately trying to idealize their deceased friend. Thomas Skinner, Stephen's best friend, described the victim as a loyal and hard-working country boy, while portraying Mary Catherine as an obsessive and possessive girlfriend who constantly controlled and stalked him. He claimed that over the last few years, Mary Catherine and Stephen's relationship had become toxic, with her threatening to end her life whenever Stephen tried to leave her, and on one occasion, pointing a pistol at her head in front of him. Another witness, Stephen's co-worker Alicia Varela, testified that Mary Catherine would obsessively call Stephen throughout the day, even when he was at work. In Mary's supposedly truthful court testimony, where she framed the shooting as self-defense, she omitted a crucial detail that prosecutor Kate Lenhard pointed out. Mary extensively discussed their troubled relationship and how, after years of harmony, it had deteriorated into physical abuse. However, she never mentioned the moment when she pulled the trigger in supposed self-defense. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard remained unconvinced by Mary's account, noting that during cross-examination, Mary never once mentioned any harsh treatment by Stephen. Repeatedly, the prosecutor asked Mary Catherine whether a woman feeling safe at home would pursue her assailant late at night to bring him back. The answer was unsatisfactory, and the prosecutor continued, vividly describing the accidental shooting. Kate Lenhard picked up the pistol and recreated the scene as she envisioned it. According to her theory, Stephen came home, and after hearing Mary out, they argued, and he refused to have dinner. Enraged, Mary scattered the prepared food around the kitchen. Stephen, trying to avoid further conflict, went to the bedroom and sat on the bed, likely waiting for her to calm down. But Mary, ready for confrontation, called out to him twice without receiving a response, walked into the bedroom, and shot him in the neck on the left side. Since he hadn't turned to face her in her closing arguments, Kate Lenhard reminded the jury of the various stories and versions that kept changing at every police interrogation and court hearing. Mary Catherine Higdon spared no details in her emotional testimony about the alleged abuse from Stephen Freeman. But before handing the case over to the jury, Kate Lenhard desperately pleaded to consider this story not as a case of self-defense, but as a case of extreme manipulation. Despite the lost confession recording, the prosecution presented other evidence and counter-arguments. The forensic examination proved that Stephen Freeman was sitting on the bed at the moment of the shooting, hence he couldn't have been attacking Mary Higdon. Mary claimed they kept the gun in the house unloaded, but detectives suspected that the pistol was indeed loaded in advance on the evening of August 1, 2018, when Mary was preparing a rope for Stephen. This was the only explanation for how grease marks not only got on part of the slide but also inside the pistol. Did Mary Catherine really load the pistol in advance? Colleagues, neighbors, family, friends, and acquaintances of Stephen Freeman unanimously testified that he was not prone to aggression. Prosecutors also pointed out that Mary Catherine Higdon changed details of her story at least 10 times since the first interrogation, attributing such changes to fear. Mary Catherine refused a plea deal as she could have been facing the death penalty. The wait for the verdict felt like an eternity to her. After hearing all witnesses and the accused, the case was handed over to the jury. Just 10 minutes later, the jury was ready to announce their decision. However, 2 jurors out of 10 had doubts about some aspects of the prosecution's story. They were concerned that investigators, so eager to charge Mary Catherine with premeditated action, had not fully checked crucial facts. Questions were raised about the lack of a complete investigation into Stephen Freeman's phone, checking his text messages and browsing history. The prosecution simply hadn't done this. Besides Mary's lies, no sufficient evidence was presented against her. The arguments presented by jurors Victor and Chris had an effect. The jury deliberated and returned a unanimous verdict, not guilty. A few hours later, Mary Catherine Higdon was free. After a lengthy deliberation, the 12 jurors concluded the following. The defendant was found not guilty on the first charge of malicious action and not guilty on the second charge of serious action. When the judge acquitted Mary Catherine Higdon on all charges, including intentional action, reckless action, assault with a deadly weapon, and carrying a weapon during the commission of a crime, many people in the courtroom were shocked, watching the person who took her son's life walk out of the courtroom. Jennifer Freeman could barely contain her anger towards the jurors, and everyone who supported Stephen's family was also stunned by such a verdict. After the trial ended in her favor, Mary Catherine returned home to be with her family in Griffin. Since then, she has stayed out of the limelight and is almost absent from social media, likely to avoid undue attention from the media and the public. Her Instagram profile is private, and no further details about her current whereabouts are known. It's assumed that Mary Catherine has moved on from her harrowing past to live a quiet and unnoticeable life. Stephen Freeman's mother dedicated a farewell post to her son on social media. Stephen lived a life filled with love, joy, compassion, and loyalty. Everyone was his friend, and those who enjoyed hunting and fishing with him were his closest. He had a heart of gold and a charming southern smile. Stephen showed his love for you by making you feel like you were the only person in the world, making you laugh until your stomach hurt, always smiling broadly, hugging you, and never leaving your side. These three simple words, "I love you," have always inspired me. So who really pulled the trigger in this story? That's a question you must answer for yourself, as all the answers in this story are evident by analyzing and presenting the situation. It's up to everyone to decide whether Mary Catherine is guilty or if it was a tragic accident that cost a young man his life. How much do you agree with the two jurors who changed the course of a young woman's life, giving her a second chance? Mary Catherine likely lives a quiet life away from the spotlight now that she has managed to leave her terrible past behind. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Lisa Holm was born on February 7, 1998, in the small Swedish town of Houck, where she had a peaceful upbringing with her parents and older sister. Known for her kindness, positivity, and determination, Lisa decided early on that she wanted to study architecture in Australia. Growing up, she traveled extensively with her family, visiting many countries around the world. As an independent young woman, Lisa worked various part-time jobs since her teenage years to earn her own money. Before the summer of 2015, 17-year-old Lisa secured her first serious job at a cafe located approximately a 40-minute drive from her home. Initially, her parents drove her to work, but after a few weeks, her father decided to purchase a scooter for her. However, during the first few weeks, her father followed her in his scooter to ensure her safety, given her limited experience driving on the roads. As Lisa only worked on weekends, her father accompanied her every morning and evening during this period. This went on until June 7th, when he finally let her drive to the cafe alone. Somewhere around lunchtime, her parents decided to visit her at work and have lunch together that day. The cafe was pretty crowded, so Lisa was really busy with work. She took a short break for lunch, had a snack with her parents, and they went back home. At 6:23 p.m., Lisa sent a text message to her father informing him that she was leaving work. However, just 3 minutes later, her father received a call from her. When he answered the phone, there was no response from the other end. Instead, he could hear some indistinct voices in the background, leading him to believe that Lisa had accidentally dialed his number. He assumed she was engaged in a conversation with her colleagues. Additionally, he heard the sound of a scooter door being closed forcefully. He repeatedly called out Lisa's name, but there was still no answer. Eventually, he ended the call and began waiting for Lisa to arrive home. However, she never showed up. An hour passed, and Lisa's parents started to worry. She should have arrived by now, so her father immediately thought something might have happened to her on the way. It was her first time riding alone on the scooter, and he was deeply concerned about her safety. He tried calling her several times, but Lisa's phone was off. After waiting a few more minutes, her father decided to hit the road, hoping to meet her along the way since Lisa should have taken the shortest route. The father, concerned that Lisa might have met with an accident, drove slowly, meticulously examining the road, but couldn't find her anywhere. He reached the cafe without any success in locating his daughter. As he arrived at her workplace, he noticed Lisa's scooter parked in front of the building. By this point, the man was already panic-stricken, having failed to find her along the entire route. The sight of her scooter provided immediate relief, making him think that she might have been held up at work for some reason. However, the cafe was empty, and he noticed something unusual. Lisa's scooter keys were still in the ignition, with her helmet hanging from the handle. This observation led him to suspect that something unfortunate might have happened to his daughter, as she would never carelessly leave the keys in the scooter and abandon it unattended in the parking lot. Meanwhile, Lisa's mother called the cafe owner in hopes of shedding light on her daughter's whereabouts, but the woman claimed to have no idea where she could have gone. She had called her employees around 6 p.m., and they said they were closing the cafe. After the call from Lisa's mother, the cafe owner immediately got into her scooter and headed there. On the way, she called 4 of her friends who lived nearby and asked them to help with the search. When the cafe owner arrived at the scene, they, along with Lisa's father, began searching both the establishment itself and the surrounding area. Their last hope was that Lisa, for some reason, might have decided to take a bus instead of the scooter. They checked the schedule, and her mother, along with Lisa's older sister, drove to the bus stop in their town. Unfortunately, this version was not confirmed. Lisa was not on the bus, so her relatives immediately contacted the police by that time. It was almost 1 p.m. and it had already gotten dark outside. The police immediately launched extensive searches. The fact that Lisa's scooter was left in the parking lot with the keys led them to consider the possibility of abduction. Cases like this are quite rare in Sweden, especially in the remote provincial area where Lisa's town was located. Therefore, the police immediately dispatched several groups with search dogs, while other officers began knocking on every house located near the cafe. When Lisa's classmates and her friends learned about her disappearance, they began spreading information about it on social media, hoping to attract more attention and possibly find some witnesses. The search continued all night, but it yielded no results. On Monday morning, the police publicly announced Lisa's disappearance and urged anyone with useful information to come forward. Around the same time, a man working in a barn directly opposite the cafe discovered a motorcycle glove on the floor and reported it to the police. The investigators had already inspected this barn on the evening of Lisa's disappearance, but had not noticed the glove there. They showed it to Lisa's parents, who confirmed that the glove did indeed belong to their daughter. This further substantiated the abduction theory, and the police deployed additional resources for the search. By then, news of Lisa's disappearance had spread nationwide, and hundreds of volunteers had joined the search effort. On Tuesday, the police received several more disturbing clues. Volunteers searched the area along a dirt road located a short distance from the cafe. There, they discovered a phone case, a receipt, a ticket, and a shattered smartphone screen. Investigators quickly determined that all of these items belonged to Lisa and concentrated their search in that vicinity. Soon after, they found additional pieces of the broken smartphone, Lisa's identification, and more receipts. All of these items were dispersed along the same dirt road. After the discovery of evidence, the police were almost certain that Lisa had been abducted. They put everything into the search, and more people joined with each passing day. The case became the biggest news in Sweden, and hundreds of volunteers poured in from all over the country. A local organization specializing in finding missing persons also joined in. The search effort for Lisa became the largest in the country's modern history, with over 1,000 participants in total. The police also received numerous calls with leads. One woman reported that she went out for a run the day before Lisa's disappearance. At one point, a man standing next to his scooter stopped her in the middle of the road. He spoke to her in English and asked for directions to a city she had never heard of. She tried to show him the way on Google Maps, but the man asked her to get in his scooter and show him the route on his navigator. The woman found this request quite suspicious, so she refused and continued running. She also shared an interesting detail with the police. The woman believed she had seen this man among the workers who were repairing the same barn located across the road from the cafe. Lisa's colleagues also shared one observation. On the day of her disappearance, one of the witnesses noticed 2 men standing across the road from the cafe, looking towards the establishment. She didn't think much of it at the time, but after Lisa's disappearance, she decided to share this fact with the police. The next morning on Wednesday, Lisa's father, along with some friends, went to search the dirt road where her belongings were found. Walking a bit further, he made several more alarming discoveries. He found Lisa's driver's license and her house keys. It all seemed as if Lisa was being taken along this road away from the cafe, while the abductor was throwing her belongings out of their scooter or other vehicle they used to kidnap her. The police and volunteers concentrated all their efforts on this area, but no other items were found. That same evening, a friend of Lisa's father was returning home from the search. Passing by the cafe, he noticed that the police tape had been removed from the barn where Lisa's glove was found. The man decided to go inside and look for any other clues once more. He grabbed a flashlight from his scooter, as it was already getting dark outside, and walked around the premises for several minutes until something shiny on the floor caught his attention. When he looked closer, he saw a woman's earring and another one just like it nearby. The man reported this to the police, who showed the earrings to Lisa's parents. They confirmed that the earrings belonged to their daughter. The police once again sealed off the barn and searched it more thoroughly. The lead detective later explained that on the first day of Lisa's search, their main focus was on finding the girl herself, so the barn was not inspected as thoroughly. They might have missed such small items as earrings, but now they brought in numerous forensic experts along with search dogs. This time, they spotted an odd clue behind a wall: human poop. Forensic experts say when crooks do terrible crimes, their body makes lots of adrenaline, sometimes making them need to go real bad. Like killers often wet themselves before or during the murder. Since Lisa's stuff was in the barn, cops think the perp might have took her there. So, they reckon this person, all hopped up on adrenaline, and couldn't hold it. The poop got sent off for DNA testing. On Friday, the search area was expanded and volunteers reached a farm about 3 kilometers from the cafe. It was a facility with several large buildings where many people worked. The search team decided to inspect all the buildings. Shortly after arriving, 2 English-speaking men showed up. One claimed that the police had already searched the farm, but the team leader doubted this and continued the search. The men observed the volunteers for a while before driving away. The other day, the search team found a pile of wood behind the cowshed. Underneath, they found a helmet, a coat, and a motorcycle headset. The police arrived on site and confirmed that all these items belonged to Lisa. They sent police experts to conduct a more extensive search of the farm. Detectives also heard stories about 2 strange men who had tried to discourage volunteers from inspecting the farm. The police also recalled the story of a woman who had met a suspicious man while she was jogging. Meanwhile, forensic experts arrived at the farm together with the volunteers. They continued to inspect this area, and soon their attention was drawn to an old trailer. It was surrounded by tall grass and looked as if it hadn't been used in many years. But next to its door, the grass was flattened as if something had been lying there recently. Some of the grass was also trapped under the door, indicating that it had been recently opened. As soon as the forensic experts opened the door, they were immediately met with a strong smell of decay. Inside the trailer, there were many lockers for clothing. Apparently, it was once used as a changing room for workers. All the lockers except one were locked, leading the experts to suspect that Lisa's body might be in one of them. They began opening each locker and eventually saw that Lisa's body was actually in one that was left open, hidden behind a pile of old clothes and rags. Despite the small size of the locker, the perpetrator managed to fit their victim inside. Lisa had a rope around her neck and a large amount of tape over her head. Her pants were pulled down and her shirt was pulled up. Medical experts determined that Lisa died from strangulation. However, they found no signs of sexual assault. All of her clothing was handed over to the lab, while news of the discovery of her body rapidly spread throughout the country. All this time, the news of Lisa's abduction dominated headlines in Sweden. When her body was found and the public learned of Lisa's brutal murder, the case shook the entire country. Such crimes were extremely rare in Sweden, and people were shocked that someone could commit such a heinous act. The Lisa body been discover, something way day eerie happen. YouTube users come see one video we dem post 13 days before the murder. The video name na 13, and he get countdown timer. The name of the channel we post them sef they worry people, them call him Lisa home. News of the video spread well, people come day surprised. Some people talk say somebody don't predict the murder, but no be so. Now just be like, say, person changed the channel name and video title after them find Lisa body. Maybe the person just wants start a notatory or they play wicked prank. Meanwhile, the police were doing everything in their power to find the killer as quickly as possible. At the time of Lisa's discovery, investigators had already brought in 2 brothers and a woman, and they all denied any involvement in the murder. They claimed that at the time of the abduction, they were at home, providing alibis for each other. According to their accounts, the older brother, Naris, was asleep in his room while his wife was preparing dinner, and the younger brother was on the computer. Naris also added that around 8 p.m. he woke up and went to the gas station, where he bought pizza and cigarettes. The police were pretty skeptical of their alibis, as all 3 could have simply been covering for each other. They collected their DNA samples, but investigators still lacked any evidence directly linking any of them to the murder. However, this didn't last long. Forensic experts were working in the barn and on the farm, using all their resources and manpower, and their efforts soon paid off. In the barn, there was a small office-like room with a large window overlooking the cafe. While examining this room, experts found 15 traces of semen from men on the walls near the window and on the floor. It seemed as if someone had stood there, watched the cafe staff, including Lisa, and pleasured himself. The semen samples were immediately sent to the laboratory, and experts quickly extracted DNA profiles from them. All 15 semen traces matched the DNA of 35-year-old brother Naris. The same was true for the feces found in the barn. They also belonged to him. In the next room, which had previously been used for storing cow's milk, forensic experts noticed a pipe about 2 feet above the floor, covered in a thick layer of dust, except for a small strip. The size of this strip perfectly matched the rope used to strangle Lisa. Traces of blood were also found on this pipe, and the DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to Naris. On the floor beneath the pipe, they discovered a piece of the same rope. Experts examined it and identified 2 DNA profiles, Lisa's and Naris's. This was a significant breakthrough for the police. It finally linked the man to the rope used to kill the victim. Furthermore, a hair belonging to Lisa was found on the floor of this room. Another crucial piece of evidence came from her jacket. DNA traces belonging to Naris were also found on it. Based on this evidence, the police believed that she was killed right there. They pieced together an approximate sequence of events. Naris had been observing the cafe for some time, and when Lisa was alone in the parking lot, he approached her. Based on the jogger's account, he could have asked Lisa for directions to a certain city or used some other tactics. Then, Naris might have asked her to get into his scooter to enter the route into the GPS system. Considering Lisa was kind-hearted and always tried to help others, she might have agreed. Once she was in the scooter, the perpetrator taped her mouth shut and drove her to the barn. There, he wrapped the rope around her neck and hung her from the pipe. According to the medical experts, this sight likely excited him so much that he defecated on the floor due to an adrenaline rush. When she died, he placed Lisa's body in the scooter and drove to the farm, tossing her belongings out the window along the way. There, he hid the body in the trailer locker, covering it with old clothes scattered around. All of this, from the moment of the abduction, took the perpetrator less than an hour. Despite all the evidence, Naris continued to insist on his innocence. His wife and younger brother had to be released because there was nothing against them. Once free, they almost immediately left Sweden and returned to their homeland, Lithuania. The preparation for the trial was intense. Naris just claimed he had worked in that barn for a long time, suggesting his DNA could have been present there due to his job. Additionally, he had an alibi provided by his wife and brother, although there were serious doubts about the credibility of both sources. In court, this could have definitely worked in his favor. On the other hand, the presence of Naris's DNA on the victim's clothing could only be explained by direct contact with her on the day of the murder. The police also found a witness who saw his scooter near the cafe shortly before and after Lisa's abduction. According to them, the scooter passed along the road between the cafe and the farm, several times at the same time, when Naris was supposed to be sleeping at home, according to his brother and wife. For several months after the discovery of her body, experts continued to examine all the available evidence using the most advanced equipment. Eventually, they uncovered traces of Naris's DNA on almost all of Lisa's clothing, including the inside of her underwear. Considering that the whole country was still following the case, investigators continued to search for any other useful clues that could impact the legal process and further prove Naris's involvement. They even went to Lithuania to speak with his wife and brother once again. The woman continued to insist that he did not leave the house between 6 and 8 p.m. But when it was the younger brother's turn, detectives suddenly got what they wanted. After telling him about all the evidence against his brother and detailing what he did with the 17-year-old girl, the man decided to tell them everything. He claimed that Naris actually was not at home that evening and only returned around 7:30 p.m. He was covered in dirt and immediately threw all his clothes into the washing machine. When the police started to question all the residents and reached their house, Naris whispered to his brother, "Tell them I was home at that time." Later, Naris explained that he was afraid he would be framed for a crime he didn't commit because he was an immigrant and had no alibi for the time of the abduction. The younger brother truly believed that his relative had nothing to do with it, but after hearing about all the evidence, he realized it wasn't the case. Lisa's funeral took place only a month after her murder. The church where it was held could only accommodate 130 people, but there were many more who came to say goodbye to her. Organizers even decided to set up benches and large screens outside so that everyone could watch the ceremony. The trial began 4 months after the murder. This case once again captured the attention of the entire country, so everyone involved in the process was under tremendous pressure. None of them had the right to make a mistake. Naris's lawyer insisted that his client's DNA could have ended up on the victim's clothing because he had worked in the barn. The prosecution, however, pointed out that this version made no sense, especially in the case of Lisa's underwear. The only way the suspect's DNA could have ended up there was if he touched the victim's underwear. The lawyer couldn't provide any other solid facts pointing to his client's innocence. At one point, he tried to push the version that the real murderer was Naris's younger brother. According to this theory, the brother somehow took multiple samples of Naris's DNA and placed them on the victim's body as well as at the crime scene. However, the lawyer failed to explain the possibility of such manipulations with the DNA. The trial lasted for a month, and Naris was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in a high-security prison. Given that this is Sweden we're talking about, the facility resembled more of a decent 3-star hotel. His lawyer attempted to appeal the verdict. In early 2017, Naris himself applied for deportation and was transferred to a prison in his homeland, although Lithuanian prisons are significantly worse than Swedish ones. The reasons for this decision were unknown at the time. The court decided to approve his request, despite the fact that providing comfortable conditions of detention cost Swedish taxpayers several hundred per day for each individual inmate. Later that same year, his motives became clear when he appealed to a Lithuanian court, and his sentence was reduced from life to 15 years. However, the joy was short-lived for the murderer, as a few weeks later, the court overturned its decision, and Naris was once again destined to spend his entire life in prison. Only now he had no chance of returning to the comfortable Swedish cell. 5 years later, in August 2022, Naris faced yet another downside of being transferred to a Lithuanian prison. While inmates were being moved to another block, one of them attacked Naris with a shank. He suffered serious injuries and died on the way to the hospital. As for his wife, the question of her involvement is still not entirely ruled out. Police noted that there is practically no chance of her direct involvement in the abduction or murder, as experts would have found her DNA on Lisa's clothing or belongings. However, it cannot be ruled out that she knew of her husband's crime and helped him evade justice by providing a false alibi. Naris's younger brother also raises questions. Cafe employees reported seeing two men standing near the barn and watching them. Considering that one of them was likely Naris himself, the second should have been his brother. However, the man's DNA was not found either in the barn itself or on Lisa's clothing, making his involvement in the murder unlikely. Perhaps they were indeed observing the young employees with the older brother and even discussing inappropriate things, but only Naris decided to commit such a heinous crime. Hello everyone. Today, we're taking you through an urgent cold case, and we need your help with it right now. We're going to ask you to watch to the end and sign the petition to reopen the police investigation into the bizarre death of Elizabeth Santos immediately. If local news plus lawyers in Alaska can start paying attention, this family can finally get the answers and the closure that they need. So please, share this video and spread the word about this case as fast as you can. We don't have much time. On August 8, 2020, in Anchorage, Alaska, two Anchorage police officers responded to a 911 call made by Lizette Hoagland Hall. When they arrived at her home, they found Lizette Hoagland Hall, her son Desmond, and Lizette's friend Elizabeth Omatara Santos. Elizabeth was bleeding to death from multiple stab wounds. Hi, welcome back to Mysterious 7. My name is Matt, and today I'm going to take you back 2 years in the past to tell you Elizabeth's story. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. This one was pretty upsetting for me. On this channel, I try to be as honest with you guys as I can, but I have to be clear. There are some very graphic details and untold secrets that are still unfolding in this case, much of which are difficult to stomach. And it is starting to feel pretty personal to me. You see, this is the first time on Mysterious 7 that we have personally responded to a cry for help. We are not professional investigators, but when Elizabeth's brother, Sebia Santos, reached out to us, we knew we had to tell his story. Elizabeth Omatara Santos was a 37-year-old African-American woman of Nigerian-Brazilian ancestry. She was a Florida native and had been living in Alaska on and off since 2010. In the days leading up to her death, Elizabeth had just broken up with her boyfriend of 10 years, Dustin Curpius. At that point, Elizabeth left Dustin's home and went to stay with her friend and co-worker, Lizette Hoagland Hall. All friends who were interviewed by the APD following her death stated that Elizabeth was happy with the breakup, but still worried about her ex-boyfriend. Elizabeth's friends all described her as one of the sweetest, kindest, and calmest people they ever knew. Unfortunately, an argument and confrontation with Lizette wound up cutting her life short. Now, we still don't know exactly what started that fight, but the following sequence of events comes straight from police records. At 6 a.m., the fight between Lizette Hoagland Hall and Elizabeth Santos began. Lizette claimed that she and her adult son, Desmond Marcus Hall, managed to run upstairs to the second floor of their home to hide in a bathroom. From there, Lizette called 911, claiming that she was in fear for her life. At 6:16 a.m., patrol officers Tae Yoon and Valeria Estrella from the APB arrived on the scene. Once on the scene, they observed that Elizabeth was showing symptoms of mental confusion, including erratic movements and slurred speech as she was unable to speak clearly. The officers quickly assumed that behavior probably stemmed from some kind of substance that she had consumed. They noted that Elizabeth was dressed only in an open robe. The officers claimed that Elizabeth's wounds didn't seem serious, but case photos and documentation showed that the robe she was wearing was heavily saturated in blood. The officers made note of the bruising and scratches on Lizette's face that stemmed from her recent fight with Elizabeth. The second was that the surroundings were messy with knocked-over plants. At 6:42 a.m., Elizabeth was placed into handcuffs. At 6:46 a.m., paramedics arrived and Elizabeth was placed in an ambulance. At 7:23 a.m., the paramedics officially began the transport to the hospital, 37 minutes after Elizabeth was placed inside. At 7:36 a.m., the ambulance reached the hospital and Elizabeth was rushed into emergency surgery. Reports mention that the surgeons were confused about the information they were given, especially considering the extent of the injuries and the extreme blood loss. At 7:56 a.m., the same two patrol officers, Yoon and Estrella, were dispatched and told to return to the scene to take Lizette and Desmond into custody. At 8:20 a.m., the same two officers finally returned to the scene of the crime. Minutes prior, Lizette had managed to somehow unlock Elizabeth's iPhone and call Elizabeth's sister Nikki in Miami. Nikki thought that it was Elizabeth calling, so imagine her utter shock and confusion when she heard a loud and belligerent woman yelling, "Your sister Elizabeth owes me money. She has some holes in her. Your sister owes me money. The paramedics left with her a while ago. She has holes in her. Elizabeth owes me some money. Wait, now the cops are back." That was how Elizabeth's family, all the way across the country in Miami, first found out about her life-threatening injuries. Lizette and Desmond were then driven to the police station in separate cars and interviewed in separate rooms. Now, to me, this part sounds like shutting the barn door long after the horses have run off and gone, doesn't it? Because this mother and son duo had more than enough time between the departure and return of the officers to potentially plot what to say and what not to say, and to tamper with the crime scene. So why was it assumed that they had done nothing and were in no way responsible for what happened to Elizabeth in their house? But let's get back to the timeline here. At 10:30 a.m., Lizette was interviewed by Officer Jason DeVille. During her statement, Lizette told the interviewing officer the story about the fight, running to hide and calling 911 with her son, and then seeing Elizabeth's injuries for the first time when the patrol officers arrived on the scene. Lizette later described the fight with Elizabeth in more detail to Officer DeVille.
And I just started like saying, doesn't calling the and calling sort of like this that upstairs or downstairs. He was downstairs that I don't know if he was in the bathroom or in his bedroom, like downstairs. Yeah, things that sounds upstairs. And so I went upstairs. So she want to go back and kind of like to do know where hints a guy. So as you're on your back and she's trying to claw you, bite you, how are you defending yourself? I just kind of let block you. So you had your hands in front of your face. Oh, I love it, do I? Yeah, over the fuffled. And then, but she eventually stopped. No, I didn't like, yes. Well, I only ever like gone away from her. Oh, you know, I was there. Like, I just kind of like scooted my way and ran out of dinners and telling some calling her head. And then, she brought shit well, and I didn't leave a call from my room from it. My phone, and I lost me to it, and like, suddenly we called. I tried, instead, she brought his phone upstairs. I found she and her hid. And board you either. In my room, we locked the door and wait. So my doctor has two doors. It goes like this, two doors. And she like hanging on the door. So you're in the bathroom. No, if it's connected, the dock thing is connected to my bathroom. So you're hiding in your bedroom. With the doors locked. Oh, me and my son are both in that room with the doors locked. And when we hear her in the kitchen, we hear her out there saying that murmurs already. It sounds like it's not really like you told hear it. It's more like that. So they were playing. I've played some press from Mayor. She banging on the door for the lead up the door out. What she with the to bust to open the door sprained or so a good religion like, well, thanks, try to get in.
In this interview, Lizette claimed that Elizabeth had been banging and screaming at her locked bedroom door during that 6 a.m. 911 phone call. However, none of these alleged noises could be heard in the background during that call. Also, something that should be mentioned is that Lizette lives in a duplex, and her next-door neighbor that she shares a wall with did not recall hearing any noise around that time either. She did, however, mention hearing banging noises around 3 a.m. Lizette further described how Elizabeth had no injuries prior to the arrival of the patrol officers. So the injuries just magically appeared just as the police officers showed up. But also, Lizette saw Elizabeth inflicting the injuries on herself earlier, and Elizabeth was able to bang on the room door and stab herself repeatedly at the same time. Sure, that checks out. Lizette then describes to Officer DeVille the main knife that Elizabeth allegedly used to stab herself with many times over and its possible location. Did you see anything? He said when you came out, you saw water and stuff. Did you see anything in your house that might have caused that? Any viral object? I saw him, right? Okay, so you did see him, right? But I didn't do anything because I was too distracted on the phone. Okay, where was the mark? Upstairs, somewhere. We're next to the couch. Oh, we're probably reminders this. It's just like it's either a thief rave or it was like the length size up. Like, like it's one or the other. At 10:33 a.m., Desmond Hall was interviewed by Detective Jeff Bell over in the very next interrogation room. Rather than explaining what happened, Desmond asked for an attorney. So she has an injury. She's at the hospital. Yeah, so they changed her when the police first got there to now, and she has some very serious injuries. So, yeah, so that's why we got all that's why it's negative the integrity of what originally saw on Mayor the very well be an explanation for it. At 12:48 p.m., Officer DeVille returned to Lizette's interrogation room and informed her of Elizabeth's death at the hospital. Now, bear in mind that previously, Lizette stated that Elizabeth was uninjured prior to the arrival of the patrol officers. But Lizette's story immediately changed once she learned about the death. Darling, we're hiding in the room. I Houck, my fan, and I don't care. I tried this after the voice fed, or right before. I called a grade and Navarro swap after the house, and then I heard her in the cute swim. And then I heard her model on it. I heard the talking and stuff, but I didn't find we were staying at the hotel till the cops got there. I know I'd rather be my it would you section Alan on afterwards, but I just like never let either the age I've been told telling and door and this like I mean it. I had the door locked, and it's still I do honored and like Kusken, it was no other well nice as a Later that afternoon, both Lizette and Desmond were freed from police custody. And despite Lizette's criminal history, neither her nor her son, Desmond Hall, were ever charged. After Elizabeth's death, a lot of misinformation was set in motion by her ex-boyfriend, Dustin. He told the APD that one time in the past, Elizabeth had supposedly handled a knife while having an altercation with him. However, Dustin's own sister commented that his memory can't necessarily be trusted, since he was often very forgetful as a result of his epilepsy, which causes occasional seizures. Incidentally, Elizabeth's toxicology report shows the presence of midazolam, a medication that Elizabeth was never prescribed and is used to treat seizures. Multiple friends of Elizabeth that were interviewed by the APD all disputed Lizette's description of her behavior. They all describe her as a non-violent, non-drug user and in a good mood when they last spoke. One friend in particular last saw Elizabeth 6 days earlier, but mentioned that Elizabeth called her the day before her death. He cut me with back. He was kind of quite bad. That kind of scared that like he was going to shoot her or something. The day of Elizabeth's death, Lizette began to tell people that she had watched Elizabeth stab herself repeatedly and slit her own throat. Detective Bell called another friend that Elizabeth attempted to contact a couple of hours before the stabbing, and Bell asked for his perspective. Additional audio evidence from that day has recently surfaced that was originally suppressed by the APD, which includes first-hand accounts of what Lizette's neighbors saw and heard that morning.
She only said 2 sentences, but she kept on screaming, you think. An overdose screaming and just the lowest. Voice you can never hear if someone put out like Gus. Real loud.
Perhaps the most compelling eyewitness statement came from a neighbor who, according to Google Earth, lives only 177 feet away from Lizette's home. So as the family continued to fight to get the case reopened, they found it even more disturbing in January of 2021 when they found out that many of Elizabeth's friends and associates in Anchorage had thrown a birthday party for her around that same time. But who throws a birthday party for someone who recently died brutally under extremely abnormal circumstances and then invites the main suspect? As you can see from these images, they clearly had a great time. One friend in attendance did tell the family that he showed up in support of Elizabeth's memory, but was quickly creeped out by the aura upon arrival and Lizette's presence. Is it even possible that the extremely weird and horrifyingly inappropriate birthday party was intended as some sort of celebration of Elizabeth's death instead of her life? I mean, hey, it has been known to happen. The Santos family has also attempted to gain police dashcam footage of the APD patrol officer's initial arrival to Lizette's home, but the APD claims that this footage does not exist. Based on jurisdictional restrictions, only an attorney licensed in Alaska can help the Santos family fight for justice. To date, the family has reached out to various law firms in Alaska, the State Bar Association, the Alaska Bureau of Investigations, the ACLU, and countless reporters, including the only reporter who wrote about the incident, Marlise Irby of KTUU. Their pleas for assistance have been ignored constantly, and reporter Marlise Irby eventually left the station without ever replying to requests to update her article. Other reporters in Anchorage have interviewed the family and promised to release the story, but never have. After further review of the crime scene photos, it was determined that there was actually a fourth knife found on the scene that was never mentioned in the police report. This knife was found in the garage nearby where Lizette said the fight between her and Elizabeth occurred. To further add to this, a recent conversation between Desmond Hall and a private investigator also confirms that Elizabeth did not stab herself.
It's almost like, I know it was a ghost. I didn't see her grab the knife. I didn't see her cutting herself.
The head of APD's homicide unit, Sergeant Bianca Cross, and her superior officers still insist that the blood-soaked open robe that Elizabeth was wearing was actually soaked in sweat. Based on police reports, Lizette claims that the only substance she gave Elizabeth in the hours leading up to her death were 4 Benadryls. Also, keep in mind one key fact, that Elizabeth's ex-boyfriend Dustin and Lizette's son Desmond are also friends with one another. Sergeant Cross continues to claim that there were no signs of a struggle and that the APD has no suspects. To date, Cross refuses to process any of the collected forensic information collected the day of the murder. The case was never ruled a homicide, and contrary to popular belief, it was never ruled a suicide by the medical examiner, and Elizabeth had no injuries to the neck whatsoever. Overall, it is really concerning as to why the APD and the media are going to such great lengths to suppress the story. Thus, it begs the question, who is connected to whom, and why is it so important that this case remains suppressed? In the state of Alaska, the statute of limitations to file a civil suit in a case like this is 2 years. August 8, 2022 marks this 2-year deadline. So it is most likely that the APD knows that they botched the entire investigation so badly that they are purposely waiting for this date to pass before they admit fault and reopen the case. So that's how it turned out that Elizabeth Omatara Santos, a young woman with no previous known history of violence, drug abuse, or mental instability, ended up dying from accidentally stabbing herself 10 times. According to our own verification and research, the drug midazolam typically produces sleepiness and is also used in surgical procedures for anesthesia. However, it was confirmed that it was never given to her during her emergency surgery. Based on the narrative that Desmond provided to the private investigator, the presence of midazolam and what Elizabeth was wearing, was it possible that sexual assault was also involved? Because honestly, I'd love to know how a drugged and incoherent person could possibly be insane enough to quickly stab themselves at least 10 times, yet coordinated enough to do it with 3 different knives and neatly clean each one and plant them in 3 different locations, all while pounding at a locked bedroom door. All I can say is that this whole case, with all its many inconsistencies, has left a severely bad taste in my mouth. Lastly, following Elizabeth's death, rumors resurfaced that Lizette was also allegedly involved in the fatal stabbing of her ex-boyfriend in Alaska a few years earlier. Now, while we cannot confirm this, there is a plethora of evidence supporting the incident with Elizabeth Santos, and there haven't been any reports on it either. In less than 2 months, the window for a civil lawsuit of legal liability against the APD will close for this case. We have until August 2022 to get the word out. We'll continue with this investigation for as long as we can, and we hope to bring you some real answers in a follow-up episode. In the meantime, we need your support. Sign the petition, share this video, and let's get the word out about the unsolved murder of Elizabeth Santos. The links are in the description of this video. If local news plus lawyers in Alaska start paying attention, this family can finally get the answers and the closure that they need. If her killers are walking free today, we want to see them caught and brought to justice. Hello everybody, my name is Sibia Santos. I'm the brother of Elizabeth Santos. I want to thank everybody for sharing this information about this case and contacting the family to let them know that this case never made sense to anybody since day one. I also hope that it shows. Got the APB and the local media done like a very good job at pretending like this case never happened. With your help, this information about this case can be exposed to more people, and I hope that what a family has to go through will leave on. And please help us continue your fight for justice.